Welcome to Conversapien, the podcast all about having conversations with interesting Homo sapiens. I'm your host and favorite of the species, Caleb Wildman, and I want to thank you for making Conversapien a part of your day. Today I have on a very special guest, but before I get into that, I want to remind everyone to spread the word about Conversapien, share links to your favorite episodes with a friend, do something to grow the sapien nation, because remember, we're here to take over the world, and I can't do that without your help. As I said, I have a very special guest today, who is my martial arts teacher, Michael Tucker. Tucker Sensei teaches Bujinkan Budo taijutsu, the martial art that we both practice, out of his dojo called A.C.T Defense, A.C.T Defense. He's been training for as long as I've been alive, having started the same year I was born in 1992. And he holds a 13th degree black belt in the art. On top of taijutsu, he also teaches defensive pistol classes, women's protective measures classes, and personal protective measures classes for people who may be interested in self-defense, but not necessarily making the jump to full-time martial arts careers. Be sure to follow A.C.T Defense on all social media for information about classes like those that may be coming up in the future, and check out actdefense.net. In our conversation today, we focus on Budo, which is Japanese for martial arts, essentially, or martial way, and refers to traditional Japanese martial arts like the one that we practice. We talk mostly about the philosophical implications of the art, including questions about the meaning of violence, sizing up opponents and situations, and concepts specific to our art, such as Fudoshin, which means immovable spirit or immovable heart. This episode is record-breaking in that it is the longest Conversapien so far, at just over 3 hours long, and every second of the conversation was enlightening. You have a long journey ahead of you, so I won't take any more of your time on this end, but strap in, stay tuned, and get ready for an amazing 9th episode of Conversapien coming up right after this peaceful, violent stinger.
You're listening to
Conversapien.
I am here with Michael Tucker, who is my teacher for the martial art that I do, which is Budo Taijutsu. And we're going to talk about Budo. So let's talk about Budo.
All right.
The first question in my list of questions is kind of an abstract one, which most of these are. But the first question is, what is violence? I think that's fairly vague. But I don't know if you have any initial thoughts.
So you may hear us laugh a bit because I think this is the first in-person Conversapien.
This is the first ever in-person Conversapien. Normally I do it over a thing called Squadcast, which has worked out great because the Rona has everybody at home. But we're actually in the same space right now.
Yeah, so we get to see each other's facial expressions, and that's probably going to crack us up a bit.
Yeah.
So.
All right. What's violence?
Such a vague question.
It's very vague.
Violence is violence.
Violence is violence.
It's like
everything is
people
everything.
hurting each other and trying to kill each other or maim each other.
Yeah. Here's a question just to start off right in a hole. just to instantly, dig myself out of a hole. There's like a more common interpretation. This is something that some people have talked about, like Jonathan Haidt's book. He talks about this a lot, about his observation about the sort of intellectual crisis of college campuses where like words have become violence. Do you agree with that assessment of violence, or can words be violence? I'm curious trying to figure out what a good definition of the word is.
I guess through looking at life in the world through a martial artist perspective, then I would have to say, saying that words are violence is a stretch for me.
Yeah.
Because, you take someone who's actually been stabbed.
Yeah.
Or has fought in war. And I guess you can see this a lot in military people and their attitudes towards these type of things where like, what the hell do you mean, your words are violence?
Yeah.
And I have the attitude that, let's say you hear someone say, well, you hurt my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And my mindset is that another person can't hurt your feelings because they're your feelings. We have a lot of control over our own feelings if we try. And a lot of times we just don't put in the effort. And so something small happens and we get all stressed out and anxious, and it's just, I think through training and through the hardship of martial arts training, those type of things become less hurtful.
I would agree with that from my perspective. The thing about the words or violence argument, this is such a great way to start this episode. I'm just going straight for this. The thing about the word is violence argument is that so to get really just weird immediately, in one of Castaneda's books, there's a part where Don Juan is looking at Castaneda, and he criticizes how Castaneda is too violent with his thoughts, violent in his being,
right?
Which there's some woohoo in all that too. But from that perspective, when I read that from that perspective, I thought, okay, yeah, so violence maybe isn't just physical.
Oh, definitely not.
But on the flip side, there has to be even if a word is uttered with violent intention, from a philosophical standpoint for the benefit of society functioning, we can't see that as the same thing in my mind. Even if you argue that it is violence.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, I would agree with that because, let's say you're driving down the road, right, and you get a flat tire and you lose your shit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's having a violent attitude to something that
right.
There's no malicious intent behind even. It just, it happens. And then your reaction is violent. Well, yeah, you could be doing damage to yourself in the sense of the stress, the anxiety, the hormones that hit your body. Maybe there was an important meeting that morning and that made you late for that meeting and it cost you your job, right? And this going in, everything's fine and this meeting's important. And then you have the flat tire, and then you don't just see the flat tire, you see yourself being homeless.
Yeah.
Because your mind will go project to that future. Oh, I missed the meeting, I might get fired, and then I can't get another job, and then I'll lose my house, and then I get divorced, and yeah.
Yeah.
And definitely back to the other thing where, certainly people do use their speech to try to be violent.
Sure.
If they're going to say something with hurtful intent.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of a theme that we discussed last night that I wanted to bring up, is that maybe, and I'm not Japanese, or I've never been to Japan, but you could almost look at it with that not as cut and dry understanding in the way that, if that makes sense, in the way that
I think so.
that yes, words can be used with violent intent, but at the same time not be classified as violence.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting thing that one of my friends who does live in Japan, he kind of talked about this one time, and I thought it was interesting. There's definitely a different mindset, I think, between the Japanese way of looking at things versus a Westerner or specifically an American way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So let's say, you and I are having a conversation and I say something that upsets you, whether maybe I intended it, maybe I didn't, but you get upset. In an American attitude, well, if you got upset by me saying this, that's your problem.
Yeah.
Whereas what my friend told me is if we were Japanese and I said something that upset you, well, then I didn't say it right. So it goes back on me. And so that's why you have, I think, to a degree, such a polite society, even though the Japanese do know how to insult politely. As we heard Orlando's story today.
Yes. In pretty ruthless ways.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably also to deal with because the story he told was in the dojo. So it's oh, you're here for martial arts training. You gotta have a level. You gotta have a certain thickness of skin.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a certain openness to hard truth.
Yeah. You talked about before that the Japanese perspective, if we're talking about being in the dojo, that the Japanese perspective on martial art seems to be that you kind of already have that when you're coming in, or you already have that maybe thick skin or that maybe warrior-esque spirit. Whereas the Americans' perspective, we're all about Or you can gain it or you can build it up.
Right. Well, I've heard that said. Like, if you come to the dojo to train, you already had the warrior spirit, right? Some dojos, maybe not, and it depends on the art. Some dojo you go to, and like you start getting thrown around and slammed to the floor, and there's definitely stories within the Bujinkan of the older teachers when they first joined, they would spend a year just basically getting beat up.
Yeah.
Not beat up like in an abusive way, but okay, I need you to throw a punch at me, and I'm going to do a technique to you, and that's all you get to do.
Right.
So they see if you've got the commitment there, if you're going to feel that pain and quit, or if you're going to stick with it. And if you stick with it, then they start showing you something. Start teaching you techniques and whatnot.
Yeah.
The idea is, I think that you have that spirit, and then the training allows you to efficiently express it through physical means. Where, in America, a lot of people join the dojo to become strong. And you could argue that, well, they already had that strength in them, and the dojo just stripped away all the unnecessary things that are holding it back.
Yeah.
So I guess there's two different ways to look at it.
So on the subject of violence, this is something that I've been thinking about lately. So a couple years ago, I was on a lot of roids.
Yeah.
I've had a whole podcast episode dedicated to talking about that experience. These are not anabolic steroids, before anybody that hears this gets mad. But they still cause, the roid rage. So I had a lot of rage.
Yeah.
Just no surprise if you are my Facebook friend. I was constantly, griping on that. And, but I've been wondering a lot recently about the relationship of anger and violence, because it's also not a secret that I enjoy hitting things and people.
You kind of have to get to a little bit of that place if you're going to do martial arts on long term.
I feel like you do. I don't know, if you don't enjoy it, you won't really be able to do it. But I think it's easy to put those two in the same basket. Like, it's easy to see violence, my fist hitting someone's face, as just a cathartic expression of anger. If that makes sense. And maybe it's because of our unfamiliarity with violence in our society today. I don't know what the reason exactly is. And certainly, people fly off the handle and put their fist through a wall.
Yeah.
So it's easy. There is a connection. But also, I hit people in the face. Like, if we were sparring with someone, if I was sparring with someone and I punched them in the face, I can do that without feeling I don't feel any rage towards them.
Right.
So that's that's just something that's been on my mind, is that, I feel like even in pop culture, when you see, okay, so you're watching some detective story, because there's a trillion billion of those, like my Dick Wolf mask that I had a second ago. So you're watching an old Dick, and exactly. And, the detective has gotten too close to the case and can't catch this guy, even though they know they do it. And what happens the next day? The detective is in the gym that's always right there next to the office somehow. I don't know how that works. Just beating the hell out of a punching bag.
Yeah.
And someone walks up and is like, "What's wrong, man? You gotta get it together," or whatever. And the insinuation is that that's just a cathartic release of anger.
I think it can be. I mean, anger is an emotion, which, to emote, to create motion, right? If you get excited, your body will start moving, whether you realize it or not. Like, anybody who's been to a concert and they hear a song that's kind of exciting, you start moving to the beat, right? It moves you. But yeah, you can use violence without being angry, which in the dojo, that's always the case, or hopefully always the case.
Right.
And, if you're, I think everybody can basically understand that, if you're angry about something and you don't release it in some positive way, it will eventually explode.
Right, yeah. So,
going to the gym and hitting the heavy bag to release some of that can burn. So for example, yesterday I was pretty angry, or not yesterday, Thursday, I was pretty angry. Mm-hmm. And so we went for a run, and I knew my point was, okay, I got to let this go.
Yeah.
And use the run to burn off, definitely burn off some of the energy, but also to clear my head. And it helped a lot. You have to find some way, some outlet to channel that anger, you can see what happens when people don't have a good way to release it.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, but that's just something I've been like considering because.
But and that goes to another thing. Like if I bring my teacher in to teach, that's something he's mentioned a couple times, and also his teacher in Japan about being hot-headed and not being angry and this sort of thing. If you use martial arts as like self-defense, even if you're being aggressive. Mm-hmm. Like aggression and anger, I don't think are the same.
Yes,
you can be aggressive without being angry.
Yeah, that's
like you can be aggressively kind to people.
Yeah, that's a better word than just violence. But like aggression, like if I'm sparring with someone, I enjoy being aggressive, and
it's because it works for you. All right, like you start. Yeah. If you don't present any threat to the opponent, then they just beat you up. Yeah. But if you present a little bit of a threat, then it's not that you get to win over them, it's that they don't get to win over you.
Yeah.
Right? Well, the thing is, like, even if you do martial arts technique, but you're being pushed by, like, maybe some kind of inner rage, then maybe that what was self-defense now becomes violence. Mm. Even if you're defending yourself, like, you're not taking, like, you haven't gotten the advantage and you just beat them in the ground. Like, even if you're just deflecting blows and trying to escape, but if you do it with some kind of anger or rage or maybe hatred in your heart, then maybe at that point it becomes violence. Mm. It's very philosophical.
Yeah, that's going to open just a whole can of worms. I'm just seeing Brad Pitt's face right now.
What's in the box?
I've mentioned this before when Duncan was on. We talked a lot about Japan, but we talked a little bit about martial arts and his training with Nagase Sensei, who is in our lineage. So right. You're my teacher, and then I said this on the other episode, but just for clarity, you're my teacher, and then your teacher is Daishihan Michael Asuncion in Michigan. His teacher is Nagase Sensei in Japan. And Duncan mentioned, I was talking to him recently, and he mentioned that Nagase Sensei says a lot, like to not be violent. And that's on the surface is hard to understand.
Yeah,
because you're doing a martial art, but that what you just said may bring a little bit of clarity to that like there's not an internal motivation that's.
Yeah, I also suspect. So Duncan has said this, relaying information from Japan, and
yeah.
I think as Asuncion Sensei has said this as well. But like you move in such a way that you're not trying to really exert your will over another person. Mm. It's they're attacking you, and you fit to whatever they're doing, and they basically injure themselves upon you.
Yes,
it sounds like it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's what he said that specifically. So he said Nagase Sensei. This was like 2 days ago, right after we watched that cast that he did with Paul Massey. But he said that Nagase Sensei says a lot in class, to not be violent, and then he'll say things like, "Oh, he stabbed himself," if you.
Right, you running through the sword, but the opponent stabbed himself on your sword.
So that's interesting. So maybe in that case, violence is like imposing your will on somebody else.
Well, yeah, I mean, what do we call it when we exert our will over other people that don't want that?
Slavery. Yeah, slavery. Yeah.
So you let the opponent kind of do what he wants, but you don't let him do what he wants to you, I guess is one way. Like, that's the thing about, not martial arts in general, but definitely, I think, with maybe a Japanese way of thinking of it. I don't know. I mean, what do I know?
Maybe a takeaway from that being violence is, perhaps by that definition, like I said, imposing your will on somebody else, which you mentioned as slavery. So
it's like a low-grade form of, like, person-to-person
like
slavery,
interpersonal slavery.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was getting at before, is like, anything I say is not a cut and dried answer, right? Like, it's just, life is too complex and complicated to say it's always this or it's never that.
Right.
So,
that's why I have these vague questions.
Yeah. Like, I know we were chatting last night on Messenger about, that cut and dried Western or American mindset versus maybe a Japanese mindset. Whereas, you may ask some kind of question, especially if it's kind of a nuanced, or the question requires a nuanced answer where, a Japanese person might say, well, yes and no.
Yeah.
Versus the way Americans like to think is, I want to know how it's done so I don't have to waste any more time trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, tell me how to do this and tell me how it works every single time. And to a degree, that's functional. Like, you have to do that to a degree for certain things, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't really answer everything. You know, it's like ideology, I guess. It's like a very simplified, dumb answer for something very complex.
Yeah. Well, I'm very critical of the way that, like, and it's like, who the hell am I? Who the hell are you? You know?
Right, that's why I said, like, what do I know? I mean,
what do I know? But, you know, whatever part of me that can be critical of things is critical of the maximum way in which that cut and dry thing has been amplified in America. It's like everything is that way all the time. Like nuance.
Well, yeah,
nuance has gone out the door.
Right.
In
like,
general.
it's not, people just aren't thinking
yeah.
about things as much anymore, it seems.
No, I don't think so.
It's like, oh, what's the pre-written answer for all this? Okay, that's easier. I'm just going to try to make the entire world fit into that one.
Right.
Concept.
What's the right answer? And how can I signal to everyone that I have the right answer? It's very frustrating, but
well, I mean, it comes into training, like the actual training in the dojo, plenty where, you know, maybe, you know, like we were practicing against someone trying to grab your wrist, and it's like, oh, does he grab this way or that way? And those require different. Like, every case requires a different answer.
Yeah. Like,
you can get generally within there, but, you know, there's a saying that you know, a man never steps in the same river twice.
Yeah. Right.
You know, because the water's flowing. When you step in at the one time, everything was in that state at that one moment. You pull your leg out, you step in again. The water that you were stepping in before is now downstream. So conceptually speaking, it's a new river.
Yeah.
So, and training is like that. You know, every time they grab or they punch or whatever, it's technically new. It's something new.
Yes. Which
has been kind of the adventure with Hatsumi Sensei. For the longest time, you can watch him teach and he never really shows the same thing twice. So it's like, even if it's got the same feeling or the same overall idea, the nuances and the details are all different again, right? Every time he demonstrates something. So he's never really demonstrating the same thing twice. And I think, like, that's hard for the Western mind to grasp. It's like, well, it depends.
Right.
It depends. What are the exact details happening at that moment?
Yeah.
Because if you can kind of tune into that, you know, and I guess this applies to life too, if you can kind of be receptive enough to tune into those details or sense them in some way or perceive them in some way, then whatever answer you come up with through as you grow and get more mature and whatnot, that your responses to those situations become more and more efficient and more correct. Right? Instead of just saying, well, this situation looks sort of like that one from a couple years ago, so I'm going to apply the exact same formula. And it may be functional to a large degree because, I mean, there's a lot of world and very little of us.
Yeah.
But if you can expand, you know, your perception of those details and refine that, then maybe this time your response will be more, will fit better, and maybe the result will be better than the last time.
On the flip side of that, I'm curious, like, where the error is because sometimes it seems that, like, it could be easy to look at Hatsumi Sensei, who's done this for how long? Like,
forever.
As long as ever.
Let's see.
How old was he when he started? Teenager?
No, he was, I think, around 7 when he started training martial arts.
Wow,
but
yeah.
he didn't meet Takamatsu Sensei, who he named the Bujinkan after, until I think he was about 25. So he already had almost,
even if you say 25.
20 years before he met Takamatsu Sensei.
Right.
And then this is 2020.
He's 80.
I think he's almost 90.
Almost 90.
So he's been studying Bujinkan, you know, or what he named the Bujinkan.
Right.
Let's see, was that 90 minus 25? Was that 65?
65? Yeah, I can't do
65
math.
years. So 65 years plus another 20, so almost 85. Well, if it was 7, then that would be 83 years of martial arts training.
Yeah.
It's like I'm 43. I'm not even like I'm barely halfway, and I didn't even start then when I was born. So
Yeah. What I was getting at is like, so you take his massive experience, and it's easy. Those things are more accessible to him. Like every time something comes in, like the newness is accessible for sure. So like, but then when we look at it, it may be easy to take from that this idea that it's always supposed to be different, if that makes sense. Where like people will just kind of like, there has to be, in my mind, there has to be some sort of functional limitation.
yeah, I think martial arts wise, it's why you practice fundamentals so often, because so in our martial art, you see the basic way a technique is done, which we might call kihon or kata. Kata is the form. Yeah. Like this is kind of an idolized version of it. Like if everything in the world was perfect, this is how it would work.
Right.
And then we have this term called henka, which basically means variation. Now, when I go, if I'm going to a seminar or I see other people training, because there's a lot of variety within the Bujinkan dojo.
Yeah.
People move differently. People have different personalities, and this comes out in their movement. So it's not like everyone moves exactly the same, even though there's some fundamentals. So recently, let's say someone's doing a technique that in a kata form, like this is the way to do it. And then, or this is the way a teacher showed to do something. And so you're practicing with someone and something's not working quite right. Mm-hmm. Or the person moved slightly differently, or maybe they have more, like, especially if they have two different body types. Like say, a teacher and a student demonstrate what's being taught, but they're about the same size.
Yeah.
And then you pair off with your training partner, and let's say you're very short and your partner's very tall. Well, naturally, there's going to be some change. But what a lot of people do, I think, is they, instead of adapting only as much as they need to still accomplish that job, to deal with whatever the problem is, they'll make up something completely new.
Yes.
And then call it henka. And I don't think that's correct. It's like, no, you're just doing something different. You're not variating on what was shown.
Yeah.
So to me, henka really, or at least one way to look at it is, it's the small adaptations but still not going outside the form.
Yeah.
It's like, the metaphor I use in class is, imagine you're driving down the highway. The kata might be, okay, there's no traffic and all the lights are green, and you're going from home to work.
Mm.
You would easily find the most efficient way to do that. Well, reality is, okay, there's traffic, and this light now is changing, and that light's opening up, and you don't know who's changing lanes where. And let's say you're driving your potentially most efficient lane, but someone gets in your way, and they're driving, way too slow. You don't take the next exit and go all the way to the back side of town and come back to work the back way.
Right.
You just make a small adaptation. You change lanes, you pass them, and then you get back in your recommended lane.
Right.
So, yeah, too many people, in my opinion, try to go the back way around the other side of town.
Yeah. And yes. and I think, maybe, I don't know anybody's actual thoughts or whatever, but maybe you could look at Hatsumi Sensei and the fact that he's so, like, in the moment things change, and you kind of like, all right, Jordan Peterson, he talks about this a lot, and I like Jordan Peterson.
So do I.
And so, hopefully that's not a problem, but he talks about not, what I'm about to say, but I can't remember how he puts it. Dadgummit.
Is this the not using wisdom you haven't earned?
Yes, not using wisdom you haven't earned. And so, so like Hatsumi has in a lot of ways, I think, earned the henka that happens. Like, things happen and it, like, makes perfect sense in that moment. He's got 70 years of experience. Well, when we look at it, I think there's some temptation where it's like I should do that, and every time it should be different.
Well, yeah, that's getting back to like exerting your will, because you've got this technique and you start being creative for the sake of being creative. Like you're not fitting to what the opponent's giving to you. You're exerting what you want, your ego, your desire. And then when you project that image upon the situation, like you're seeing what's inside your own mind. You're not seeing the reality of what the opponent's doing, and that can get you killed. So the goal is like, you get all this experience because you do repetition after repetition after repetition after repetition, and your body starts to sense. You get a feeling of how things are going, and you can make micro adaptations without conscious thought. And so at that point, like, you should be open. That's why you shouldn't, you should be at like a 0 in your heart, if that makes sense. Like, don't try to exert your will. It doesn't mean don't have good. You got to think about what you need to do, I guess. And think is a dangerous word in that sense, because you can't think your way through a fight. Yeah. Right. Not like a sudden, I'm minding my own business and now this guy's trying to attack me. Like, I think maybe there's ideas in neuroscience that your spinal cord, like your central nervous system, is kind of a second brain. So it's not conscious thought. Like, you can consciously develop movement patterns that'll be efficient, but then you have to train to such a degree that they don't require conscious thought anymore. Like driving. I mean, nobody really thinks about how to apply the brake and turn the wheel and do all these things. They just do it naturally because they've done it a lot. They've got the experience. So they're constantly training Henka, but they're still staying within a basic functional form.
Yeah, well, I had a kid, one of my kids that I teach the other day, on like a getting to know you survey. I asked, what are 3 things that you like to do? And he put driving.
Is he 16?
Yeah, and I thought that was so funny, because it's like, nobody likes, or no one, I don't think anybody really likes or dislikes or has any feeling about driving after you've done it so much.
I think some people, I think you can enjoy a drive, but it's like,
sure.
I don't know that he really likes the driving. He likes the freedom.
And I think there's also part of it is that it's not like there's a newness to it. Obviously, he's 16. So it's not that automatic system for him as much yet that it is for you or me. Yeah.
There's still probably a little bit of conscious effort in it. That he's got to focus.
So it feels like a thing. Like, to me, driving doesn't feel like a thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you first started driving,
it's crazy.
It's like you have to concentrate and you're worried about everything, and then your hands are like white knuckling at 10 and 2.
Yes.
And then now it's like, you drape your wrist over the steering wheel and your other hand's on the passenger side seat. And you're just like listening, singing to a radio, and you're not thinking about anything. And sometimes you get so in the zone of the music maybe you're listening to that you don't remember the drive home.
You don't even know
It's like, I don't remember anything about that drive.
Half the time I'll have my like index finger and my thumb at like 7, and that's where I drive.
It's like I'm trying to eat a sandwich and I'm driving with my knee.
Yeah. I started rewatching Dexter recently. That just reminded me of it. He's always passionate about driving foods.
Yes.
The banana's perfect for driving.
Yeah. It's a safety issue.
I want to open a can of worms.
Oh, boy.
But all of my questions here are cans of worms. And they're all vague. And they're all cans of worms.
I suspect they're not controversial cans of worms.
No, they're not controversial, though. Philosophical cans of worms.
What the hell does that mean?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm looking at. The other night, on Wednesday night, Nagase Sensei did a kind of like a podcast, more or less, with Paul Massey, who's a Daishihan who lives in Japan and has lived there forever. But he's a Westerner, and he's gotten a lot of people on for his talks. And Nagase Sensei talked a lot about this particular thing, and I wanted to ask you about it because it's something I'm trying to figure out myself. But he said that, and he said over and over, that the best self-defense or the best protection is to have a good heart. I think it's really easy to look at that as if people are already like good, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to kind of see that as like a motivational, like, you just have a good heart, sort of thing. But I've really been thinking about it over the last couple of days. So I've been trying to forget what that means, or forget what I think that means, and see what other people say it means. What do you think it means?
Well, I'll preface this by saying I have no idea to presume that I know what Nagase Sensei is thinking. What I suspect, or what I think could be a possibility of it, or maybe a factor, and there's probably multiple factors. One, I think, is like if you have a good heart, like if you're thinking of it in the terms of like a, dare I say, moral sense. I don't even know if that's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a good heart, like you're less likely to have enemies than you are to have friends. Like you'll have more friends than enemies, and by that way, you're less likely to be killed.
Yeah,
because you're not going to piss anybody off.
Yeah,
if you're an asshole, you don't have a good heart. You've got hatred. You're resentful. You're bitter about everything. At some point, that's going to emanate out from you, and then people either, like, it may be a form of self-defense in one way that people don't like you, so they're not going to help you when you need help.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no one's going to come to your aid. Your buddies, or no one's going to help you move, right? No one's going to give you a ride to work when your car breaks down. And then also you'll run up maybe with somebody who's also angry and bitter and resentful, and now you've got two clashing heads, and then you have violence, right? So I suspect that could be one way of looking at it. Also, we know, if you want to look at it maybe like psychologically or maybe physically even, if you've got that much hatred in your heart and bitterness, resentfulness, that it'll make you physically ill. You'll get weak. You'll start having stress issues. You maybe develop a psychological disorder.
Yeah.
You just can't live that way. People don't live well with a lot of anxiety. So, yeah, I think it's important to have a good heart. Like we were talking about anger and violence. If you're angry inside, you're doing violence to yourself, maybe.
Mm.
So having a good heart is, you have peace with yourself. That is kind of a Nagase Dojo motto, is like to protect peace and justice.
Yes.
Right. So, but you got to start with yourself first. Protect your own heart first. Maybe even in a physical sense, like, take care of your cardiovascular health so you live a long time.
Yeah. So you're giving me 3 definitions. So what you're saying is...
And that's kind of that Japanese mindset, is like, it's not set, cut and dried. And I mean...
What you're saying is there's another form of sanshin.
Maybe. And I don't know. Maybe Nagase Sensei would say, yes, that's right. Like, I don't know. I think that's, if, I've talked about this kind of way of thinking, like with Joe, who's been in Japan several times, and she studied Japanese and has worked with a lot of Japanese people through her job. I was like, we were in class one time, and I said, yeah, and for an American, it's like, okay, you do this, and then this happens, or maybe a better way of saying it is, okay, do you do it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Where an American would say yes or no, and a Japanese person would say, well, right, and she was kind of laughing and nodding. So yeah, that happens a lot. Like, it's not. I don't know where that stems from. Maybe like a Buddhist thing. I don't know, like Buddhist influence over the culture, because Buddhism's been around for 2,500 years.
Yeah. He also did talk about protecting peace and justice. This is a thought that I had in class, and it's like I don't know that this will go anywhere in the conversation. I'm just going to share the thought, but. So we've been studying Kenjutsu lately because with the corona, we've been doing more weapon stuff.
Yeah.
For social distancing. And Kenjutsu is Kenjutsu. Kenjutsu has always kind of blown my mind, but that's not a huge achievement for anything, because like gravity blows my mind too. But Kenjutsu is sword stuff for people who are just like, what is it saying?
It's the art of the sword.
It's the art of the sword. It is... Well, in Japan, as far as I understand, it's kind of emblematic of Budo. Like, if you wanted to point to any one thing that's sort of the philosophical summary of Budo, it would be the katana. Yeah, it's kind of you've heard this phrase that the sword is the samurai's soul. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even who knows what that means, but you can at least determine that there's some kind of importance applied to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So with Kenjutsu, what blows my mind, not just blows my mind, but really just frustrates me, is that the margin for error becomes just as thin as the sword itself. You know, it's
Yeah, there's a Japanese term, and I can't remember it, but it basically means the thickness of one sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And what that means is like from the front side to the back side, like if you flipped over a report, like that distance between the words on the front of the page and the words on the back of the page is the distance between life and death.
yeah. Almost literally, it is. I mean,
Yeah.
because the blade is almost that size, pretty much.
Well, I mean,
The
it's
part that'll kill you.
It's a 3-foot long razor blade.
Yeah, exactly. So it drives me a little bit crazy. I have a love-hate relationship with Kenjutsu because on the one hand, I think a lot of martial arts is about seeing your own flaws, seeing your own openings.
Yeah.
So you'll see them.
Oh, yeah.
But it makes everything, it's like a magnifying glass.
Well, they'll be revealed to you.
Yeah, it will reveal.
Like if you could see them, then they wouldn't be openings. They get revealed to you by the opponent doing whatever he's doing.
Yeah. But the thought that I had, it just kind of ran through my mind, sort of out of nowhere. But I was about to like cut someone's head off, more or less, you know, if it was a real blade. And I was thinking but I thought is that justice? Like was the thought that came to my head, and it kind of opened an idea. It was like, if I am the guy that lives and the other guy dies, like is that justice? And does that question, like to me in my mind, kind of opens another question of like how you live your life. Does like philosophically how you live your life make it so?
I think I understand.
If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just the thought. Like I said, I don't know that it'll go anywhere in the conversation, but it's something that I've been thinking about.
There is something seems to say. You can read this in some of his books. He would always talk about like natural justice, this idea of natural justice, and not that I have it completely figured out, but one thought that came to mind that may define that, or at least point to it, is it goes back to having a good heart.
Yeah.
That especially for us Westerners, we think of justice as someone has been wronged and we have to right it somehow, and usually that involves some kind of punishment for the person who did the wronging.
It's like revenge, but doled out by the state. I mean, in some senses.
Yeah, sometimes that is. I mean, and sometimes it's not.
Sure. I mean, you protect future victims too.
I mean, I would say like our most basic, our most common idea of justice is someone has been victimized by someone else. The person who did the wrongdoing needs to be punished, and that's justice.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
You can take it to another level. Okay, now we have to help the person who is hurt, and maybe that's a form of justice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe we see that something bad could happen in the future, and so we stop it before it happens, and that's justice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Hatsumi Sensei's, I suspect this. I don't know this at all. That this idea that he would write about that he would say natural justice is basically setting the conditions where evil just has no foothold.
Yeah.
Like there's like no fertile ground for the seed to grow. And I think that's, in my mind, that's a better way.
Yeah.
Like it's proactive rather than reactive on one level.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm pointing and, yes.
Slap a table.
Yes. I need to slap a table. Shout out to Doug. But yes, so the thought that I have a bad habit of, I'll just like say something vague and fancy and not explain it. But that's just kind of who I am. But the thought that kind of ran through my mind, like, is it justice? So like, okay, I'm training with, Josh, maybe. Shout outs to Josh.
Going to do a lot of name dropping here.
And I at the end I cut Josh's head off. I swing a blade at Josh's neck. It's a shinai, but the
shinai is a bamboo sword for training. Yeah, we're not cutting each other with live blades.
Right? No. Yeah. Yeah. That would not be a shout out to Josh, but like I remember, libations. I have to pour some of this water that I'm drinking out. So. Hey, it's water. I don't know what to tell you, folks. But that thought struck me, which was, is it justice? Is it justice if he dies and I live? And I think extrapolating from that, like going back to the good heart thing that you were talking about, maybe based even on that, you try to set your life up in a way that if someone attacks you and God forbid they don't survive,
Right.
You have to
Right.
take their life, then your life is set up in such a way that that is justice. But it goes back to in that case, and this, I'm just kind of rambling, but it would go back to you having your crap correct. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think I get what you're coming from, or what you're getting at.
Or rather,
Yeah, so-
that, like, if I have to, if my life is set up correctly, then if I was in some situation where someone else attacked you, and then that person did not live as a result, that should not be an injustice,
Right.
is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But if you're living crazy, where, like you said earlier, you're resentful and angry, and you run into the other resentful and angry guy, where's the justice in who? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I mean, well, let me use some movie references to
Okay.
kind of point around this. Maybe
Okay.
not. Maybe it's not a maybe it's not directly addressing this, but it's getting close, I think.
Yeah.
So, hopefully people have seen Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
There's a scene near the end of the movie. If you haven't watched this, it's a fun movie. You should watch it. But there's a scene near the end where they're, and this is a spoiler alert. There's a scene near the end. They're defending a bridge.
Yes.
That if the Germans get across, like, they're going to just completely wipe out this area. So they're trying to defend it, and their last, if they can't hold them off, then they're going to have to blow the bridge. And it's also, I think, a supply line for the Allied forces also. So they're trying to protect this bridge. Anyway,
Yeah.
the basic plot of the movie is Tom Hanks' squad has to find this guy, Private Ryan, and bring him home because he's one of 4 brothers, and the other 3 brothers have been killed in combat. So they've decided, we're not sending this American mother one more folded flag.
Yeah.
So they send him to go get him. And along the way, they have to kill people. A few of his guys get killed, and they think the mission is bullshit. But they've been given orders. So they find Private Ryan, and, basically, I think every member of the squad gets killed, or damn close to that. And Tom Hanks is sitting there. He's been shot. He's sitting on the bridge. He's dying. He knows it. Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, shows up, and Tom Hanks looks at Matt Damon and says, "Earn this." Like, all these guys, we're protecting the bridge, but we came here for you.
Mm-hmm.
We just happened to be here and could provide reinforcements for this bridge. If we weren't here, like, all of you get slaughtered and it'd just be bad.
Yeah.
So he's telling him, hey, all these men did all this for you, or maybe even for his mother. And he says, earn this. And so you see a fade out in the scene. It's an old guy at the memorial in France, I think. And he asks his wife, tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've been a good man. So maybe him living his life properly, and he's there with his kids and his grandkids, and maybe by being a good man, like, that was justice. He lived, that was lived right.
Yes.
Right. A couple other movies, if you've seen Seven, we've already kind of joked about it before.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll make it in the podcast, but anyway.
No, it'll make it.
Okay.
Everything will
Where
make it.
you're saying, like, okay, I'm seeing Brad Pitt's face, and I said, what's in the box?
Yeah.
So, the basic plot of Seven is there's a serial killer killing people based on the 7 deadly sins, and at the end of the movie, Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman are detectives, and they're trying to find this guy. The serial killer is played by Kevin Spacey, and they catch him because he turns himself in, but he's got at least 2 more sins to commit, to make murders out of. So, he reveals he takes him out in the middle of nowhere. There's a box delivered, and Morgan Freeman finds out what's in the box, and he's like, everybody stay away. the bad guys got the upper hand. And turns out that the serial killer has found Brad Pitt's wife, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, found her house and killed her and cut her head off and put it in this box. And she was pregnant at the time. And so, I mean, he's murdered these people, these other people in the most horrible, painful, most grotesque ways possible. Like it's like the embodiment of pure evil.
Yeah.
So he starts to have a suspicion of what's in the box, and that's why he's like, "What's in the box?" And he'll point the gun at him, at the bad guy, and then he'll cry a little bit, and then he'll point because he's trying to decide, do I kill him or not? Like, this guy is evil, and he's, if he were to get away, like, he's basically gotten away with it. Yeah. He turned himself in. He did what he wanted. He controlled this whole situation. He's getting away with it. He's getting away with horrible murder. He's getting away with evil. And he knows what he wants to do, right? So even, and so the way it plays out is he is trying to get Brad Pitt to shoot him. Yes. He wants him to murder him. Not just kill him, but murder him. And it's like, okay, this guy's evil. He needs to be put down, right? I think that's not a far jump for people. But he does it in a state of wrath. That was the final sin. So
I hate this movie.
Yeah, it's awful. It's fucking awful.
No, I hate that. I hate the dilemma here.
Yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, this guy should probably be executed.
Yeah.
But he kills him in a state of wrath, pure fucking rage.
Yes.
And shoots him several times, like beyond, okay, shoot him once in the head, he's dead. But no, he shoots him several times. And it destroys Brad Pitt. He loses his soul. His soul is destroyed. So the guy got away with yet another murder, in a sense. And so, was that justice? Because it was, the guy got executed, but it was a murder. It wasn't an execution, it was a murder. Brad Pitt murdered the bad guy. And so there's another sin. And so is that justice?
Yeah.
Now, if he's like, okay, Morgan Freeman's character was more detached and he realized also, this guy should die. Maybe he would just like shoot him. If Morgan Freeman's character shot the bad guy before Brad Pitt had a chance to, like, he's stopped the evil man, but he's also prevented Brad Pitt from becoming a murderer. So maybe that would have been greater justice. And it goes back to that whole like cut and dried. Yeah. Things are not so simple. Things are very nuanced and complicated.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. But that movie, man, that scene in that movie, and there's many other movies that, they've set up that same idea. But
yeah, I mean, Last of the Mohicans is a good one because at the end, Magua, the bad guy, has, killed several people, destroyed villages. He's on the warpath, and he's kidnapped a couple women that the good guys are in love with, and the good guys go after them, and basically run up a like 80-degree climb on a mountain, find the guys, and then the one son like battles Magua, but he's not quite skilled enough, and Magua kills him. And that guy's father sees this, and he's like, he uses his, in that case, like he kind of uses his rage, but he's more skilled. He uses that power to defeat Magua, and right before he kills him, he like, you see him like shake his head like, no more. You're done. You're done! And he empties himself out, clears his heart, clears his mind, and kills Magua, and then, that's the end of that.
So this is something that I've thought about the Seven scene a lot, and I often have thought, like, when I've thought about it, trying to put myself in Brad Pitt's shoes. Is there a way that Brad Pitt's character shoots Kevin Spacey in the face without murdering him?
Well, that's the thing, is like, I suspect it's what's in your heart, and only you will know. Legally, yeah, you're still probably going to go to prison because that was not like legally justified,
right?
But when we talk about self-defense, I always mention like, okay, we don't have really a justice system, we have a legal system,
right?
some laws may or may not be just necessarily, but that's the law.
To go back to Kenjutsu, which went from Kenjutsu to murder.
Yeah, we took a little bit of a
but it's
tangent
not,
there.
I don't think it's that much of it. Like the thing about Kenjutsu is that it's, when we're doing taijutsu, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Like the question of who lives and who dies is very unanswered most of the time in taijutsu. A lot of times. I mean, maybe you break the guy's arm, and maybe the fight develops into something else, and who knows? But there's a finality to so much of like you cut that guy's arm off,
that's pretty bad. You can die
cut
for
that guy's neck. You cut the guy's leg. Like if you touch the guy with the sword, the chances that he dies are pretty high, especially if you put yourself back in that time period. Medicine's not what it is today.
Right.
Like, there's not a good touch with a sword.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I want to say Dave Grossman has written about this, that murder rates would be much higher if it weren't for our current level of medical science. Because so many people get saved.
Yeah.
Like you would die from this, but you got to the hospital in time, and now that's technically not a murder case.
Right.
But, go back 100 years and it would be.
Yeah, well, I was watching a story. My mom calls them stories as a joke, but I was watching a story, which is...
Is this a soap opera?
A story is not a soap opera. It's a murder story.
Okay. See, my grandparents always say, "I'm going to watch my stories," and that meant soap opera, daytime soap operas.
Yeah. Yeah, but if my mom ever says story, she's talking about somebody's getting killed. But
dun dun.
Yes. Or she loves those true crime things. I was watching one of those, and there was this crazy girlfriend who wanted to be with another guy and was having an affair with another guy. She was married to the guy that she tried to kill, and she stabbed him twice, in the gut. And it's he would be dead. He would have died. But he went.
Oh yeah.
He went. She drove him to the hospital, stabbed him one more time in the parking lot because she was just trying to get
Here's a parting gift.
Trying to get it in there just in case. And
one last thing, I got the final word. You're stupid like your father.
But he survived. But yeah, he would be dead probably. Especially if we go back in time. So that's an interesting point. But yeah, there's not much left to say in my mind about Kenjutsu. But other than that, it's just frustrating and hard. But. But that's the thing that makes it frustrating and hard, is that it's so serious. And I think that's where a lot of, or at least for me in my current Budo career, it brings to mind the philosophical considerations for Budo in a way that regular taijutsu training may or may not. It just brings that stuff to the forefront because everything is so serious.
Yeah. Well... a lot of, especially in Japan, a lot of, even common phrases are based on Kenjutsu terms. There's a thing called Subo Zorai. And it's basically where, you've probably seen it in movies, where the two people clash swords and they get real close and they've got the sword guards grinding at each other and no one really has the advantage and they sit there and struggle.
This is the Star Wars thing with the lightsaber.
They will say something similar to that. If you and I are having a conversation, we reach an impasse about our talking points, and they'll say something like Suba Zarai, we've come to an impasse, neither one of us has the advantage, we're not getting anywhere, it's not resolving, something similar to that, I think. But in terms of training and in terms of hand-to-hand taijutsu type stuff, really the weapon training comes first, because if you think about it, if you've got an army and you're going to fight another army, you're going to use your weapons first. And if something goes wrong, you lose your weapon, it breaks, whatever, and then you go to hand-to-hand because you've had a bad day. And now this is all you have left.
Yes.
But in the dojo, we kind of focus on the taijutsu first, and that may be based on the techniques that were passed down, that we drive everything with taijutsu as a basis, rather than, we've got some hand-to-hand skills as a backup plan.
Right.
And so that's why one of the kind of ways of, or rationalizations or ideas behind training so many different weapons, so much variety, is the one thing that is common is the body. But, in terms of the seriousness, it's good to approach everything, even the taijutsu training, with the seriousness of kenjutsu.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you can still kill people with your hands, and people can kill you with their hands.
Yeah, but it's so it's so crystal clear with kenjutsu, and I think with taijutsu it's easy to forget that. It's easier to get. It's harder to get lazy with like that. Those the considerations about the depth of like the violence, with kenjutsu, because it's very clear. It's like, oh, then you cut his carotid artery, he bleeds out and dies, and he's dead. He's done. He's gone.
With the finality of kenjutsu, hopefully, maybe on some level, it gives you perspective of how dangerous you can be, right?
Yeah.
And especially if you take that same attitude towards your hand-to-hand training, that, okay, maybe you won't engage in combat so quickly or easily or so frivolous, is that a word? Frivolously?
Frivolously, yeah.
Yes, that word. You'll refrain from using it if you don't have to, and then by that, you save people's lives, right? If you don't need to get into the fight, don't get into the fight. And so maybe that's a form of justice. Yeah, if you've got all this training, it's like, I could kill you with my bare hands. As hokey as that sounds. But you don't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like Peterson likes to mention, that phrase from the Bible, the meek shall inherit the earth. And through his research, he discovered that meek essentially means people who have swords and know how to use them, but choose to keep them sheathed.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's part of how, if you have a good heart, maybe you'll refrain from using your weapons too eagerly, right? That's a big attitude. Like when we'll teach like a self-defense course or something and try to get people to come at least get a little bit of training. Common response is, well, I'll just shoot them. And it's like, really?
Will you?
You're just going to kill someone. No matter what level the threat is, some drunk asshole whose team lost the game and he's belligerent and doesn't know what he's doing. He tries to pick a fight with you over a fucking game, and you're going to shoot and kill him for that.
Right.
Yeah. Tell me that's justice.
Yeah.
Right. Like, no, you're being arrogant. If you think that way, you're being arrogant.
Yeah.
Or you're being, probably a little arrogant, probably lazy, and probably insecure.
Yeah.
Because, that's a hard thing for especially men, like, to come do some training. Like, either they get that they need the training or they don't, almost. Like, I did I guess it wasn't last year, maybe it was the year before, I can't remember. A local contractor, construction contractor contacted me, and they have these, like, health initiative type things, that they do for their staff.
Yes.
Kind of like a little elective type stuff. Anyway, they called me to come and give, like, a talk on self-defense. And it was open to everybody in the company. I think maybe 14 people showed up, and I did 2 of them. The first one was all women. The second one was all women except for one man. And I have a suspicion that the men didn't come because they feel like a lot of men think, well, I'm a man. I should be born with this ability.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no. You have to train. Anything you're going to do in life, you have to practice. You have to train. Right. And that's the thing is, like, you look at these, like, old movies like Braveheart or
such a great movie.
or Last of the Mohicans, is like, what you have to realize is the background. Like, they show it a little bit in Braveheart. He goes off with his uncle, and his uncle teaches him how to fight.
Yeah.
Right? He wasn't born with it. He got taught by his uncle. Last of the Mohicans, probably the same case, is what we don't see is Hawkeye in his childhood training to be a warrior.
Mm-hmm. And
so it's like this unconscious thing that men think, well, I'm a man, I'm just born with the ability to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, maybe you've got the guts, but do you have the skills?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the spirit is willing, but the flesh can't handle it, right? So you have to train. And that's just, it's weird. It's like the bizarro world where martial arts is like the bizarro world. Yeah. It's like, people come to class and I'm like, okay, take it slow, take it easy. These are new skills. And a lot of people who come to the dojo for the first time have never done anything really physical in their life. Like, they never played sports or anything. So they don't have a whole lot of kinesthetic body awareness. and I try to show them something, and they go super fast.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's a fight. I have to go fast, or I'll get hurt. It's like,
Yeah.
Well, did you get in a car the first time and drive, 80 miles an hour down the interstate into Atlanta traffic? No, you started in a parking lot and tried not to hit light poles.
Right.
And for some reason, like every skill people learn, they start, that slow, like that, what is it, crawl, walk, run pace?
Yes.
But you get to the dojo and people are like trying to go balls out from day one. It's like you're either going to hurt yourself, most likely, or you're going to hurt somebody else unintentionally.
Yeah.
So
if you learn anything, you're just going to probably have a bunch of terrible habits anyway.
That you're going to have to come back and fix because you're making yourself inefficient even though you think you're being fast.
Yeah. I would say martial arts, like, are so hard. And this will get into, like, I wanted to ask you in a minute something else, but I don't want to say what it is just yet. But
okay.
I want to say first that martial arts, like, if you don't do martial arts, probably you shouldn't.
You should just quit. You'd be better off.
You'd be better off. But no, here's how I think of it, because I play music. Martial arts, the closest thing that I can think of that encapsulates just the thing, the difficulty of it, is probably maybe like trying to learn how to play the violin. The violin is a god awful instrument. The violin is a terrible instrument. Like everyone's heard a good violin player. Everyone's heard like a orchestra recording or seen an orchestra,
right?
Or maybe even a good fiddle player in a bluegrass band. That instrument is terrible. Like if you want to learn how to be a musician, not just someone playing something, but a musician with an instrument, that's not the instrument to play.
Right. Gotcha.
Wait till you're reincarnated as a kid whose parents are like doting on you violin lessons from you're 5 years old. And there's probably people that play violin that'll be like disagreeing with that. But in my experience, like, so even when you put the bow, I have my hand up like as if there's a video
air
recording.
violin. Yeah.
Air violin. When the bow touches the string, it's awful. If you go get a violin right now, you're like, oh, I'll just put my fingers on it, swipe the string with the bow. It's going to sound like the worst thing you've ever heard in your life.
It's just racket.
It's going to sound awful.
Noise.
Just the subtlety of getting the bow to work on the strings is the worst. I mean, it's the worst thing. You could learn how to play you'll learn how to play the guitar and become and approach musicianship with guitar before you could do that on violin. The margin for error is very slim. Like, there's no frets. You have to like artificially go back and forth on a note and go with the vibrato,
right?
Partially just to hide the fact that the thing's pitch is awful because it's a fretboard the size of my hand, and it's not a fretboard. I'm speaking out of ignorance, so if you play violin, you can start your own podcast.
I'm going to tell you all the ways
prove me wrong.
Caleb was wrong.
You can call it the violin player's response to that one episode of Conversapien, and that'll be fine. But that's as close as I think a musical instrument can come to the overarching thing of Budo, because it's such a thing. It's such a it's such a journey, and it's not easy by any means. And I think in the West, going back to the Western versus Japanese, our cut and dry understanding based on like Chuck Norris movies is that, you get that black belt and now you've mastered the martial art. It's like, if you're actually in the trenches, you know what a complete farce that is.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Well, I guess a couple things that immediately come to mind on that is, one, there's a term in Japanese called shodan. And shodan literally means beginner level.
Yeah.
And when someone gets a shodan, what that means is they get their black belt.
Yep.
It's like when you get your black belt, now you're a beginner. You've studied enough that now you can start to learn.
Right.
And that's the attitude the Japanese have, right? But Americans, we think, black belt, you're an expert.
Right.
And that's totally that's not the case. Now,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of American martial artists who use like the various belt systems. You know, what most people think of in their mind is, okay, you've got like white, yellow, orange, blue, whatever, and then up to black. And then they're like, okay, now you're an expert. And, that's just not the case.
Yeah.
Like, you've studied the basics and got enough exposure that you can start you can start to pick up on larger concepts, I suspect.
Yeah.
The other thing that came to mind immediately is Nakase Sensei has, or I've been told he said this, is that he trains knowing that he'll never master this in his lifetime, but perhaps in the next lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like, and that's the attitude you have. There is no end point. Like, you train until you die.
Yeah.
Right? Or you just can't do it anymore. Like, for whatever reason, maybe you're too old, maybe you had a disease and you're crippled, but you have to have the mindset of approaching it that knowing that you'll never master it.
Yeah.
Right? Or knowing that there's no end point. There's always something you can improve.
Right.
And I think that when you think of it, and when you sit back and really think of the level of commitment that takes, because if you realistically think about it, back to how you live your life, justice, good heart, all that stuff, the chances of you actually needing to use this for real is extremely slim. Mm-hmm. Most people won't use it for real. They won't use it a single time in their life, not the physical skills. And so they spend hours and hours and hours a year for decades for something they'll never actually use.
Yeah.
But
I hope I never have to use it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's what a smart person would think. Yes, anybody with half a brain would not want to have to use it. It's like, okay, because there's always a chance that the other person can kill you.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're done.
You're done. So, shout out to Jordan Peterson. But like, even that, like, in terms of relating, like, the seeming futility of training that long for something you're most likely never going to use, logically thinking about it, you probably say, well, that's stupid. But two other ways to look at that. Here we go again with yes and no. It's like, well, what if a guy, on the street tries to attack you with a knife and your skills save your life? Was all that time spent training worth it? Well, if it kept you from dying, I'd say yes. In terms of like the black belt being the expert idea, which is again wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like the martial arts training doesn't make you invisible or invincible. Mm-hmm. It gives you a little bit of an edge. Whereas if you didn't train, you wouldn't have that edge. Yeah. And maybe that little bit of edge is what saves your life. Yeah. It's like, it seems ridiculous. But, the positive of it, in my opinion, is the process of going through the training forges you as a person.
Yes.
And enhances every other aspect of your life.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. Even what I was talking about earlier about kenjutsu and these ideas about justice, and like martial arts puts those things in my face and holds them there. And I don't know that I would personally be able to. I wouldn't be as out to consider those things if it weren't for it. So like that's partially a reason that I train. I think that it's more,
Well, it makes like the whole Socrates quote, an unexamined life, wherever that is, like, is not worth living. Something to that effect. Something like it makes you look at life.
Yeah.
It makes you look at yourself.
Yes. Oh yeah.
You find out both the good and the negative, or the positive and negative truths of yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And makes you face it.
I do want to clarify, like, with for anybody who may be listening, who is interested in martial arts, when I say it's very hard, what I mean to say is, well, I do mean that it's very hard, but I also mean that, like, it's not that it's not worth doing. And that's something that I wanted to kind of segue into a question that's on my list of little notes here, which was what does Budo do for the practitioner? Or, like, why do people practice Budo? Which we may have just touched on a little bit, but
yeah, I think we did.
Yeah. For me, I don't know if this is true for you, because you have a lot more experience than I do, but the people that I meet that are serious about Budo are also likely to be people that are serious about at least trying to better themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think in some ways those things go hand in hand. Maybe because it is so hard and it is such something to, like it's crazy when you think about it that Nagase Sensei says, I will never master this in my lifetime, but maybe the next. And that kind of encapsulates what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
He is like, to my mind, if we were asking my definition, I would say he's already mastered Budo. Right? In his mind, just from 3 nights ago when he's talking about it, he's like, oh, now I'm back to the 0 point. I've gone through the omote side of training the first, 25?
Yeah, 20 years.
20 years, and now I'm like back to 0 going to, and like he's already sees his journey out before him. Like the wall that Asen Sensei has talked about before is not at the end of his hallway, right? He doesn't see the end.
Yeah, like the way Ascension Sensei has put it is like you're walking down the street and you're walking beside a building, you see the corner of the building.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you get to it and you turn the corner, the next corner of the building is even further away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you get to that corner and you turn that corner again. Like let's say you're making a clockwise route around this building, right?
Mm.
So each turn you're making a right turn multiple times. For the visual
right
listeners.
Visual learners.
Yes.
Don't get me started on visual learners.
But so you get to the next corner and it's even further away, and you get to the next corner and it's even further away, and it just keeps going. Like Pearson talking about the North Star, you aim for the highest possible good,
and then
you get an idea and you get close and you realize, oh, it was actually further away.
Yeah, and
but through that process, it makes you grow and become a better person.
Yeah,
there's something in the question that you said.
I was about to say that's the Gokui of the Gokui of the Gokui.
What is it
Budo
does for people?
People, yeah. So I said, what does Budo do for people? And we kind of already touched on it a bit. And then I also said the people that I know, I feel like the people that I know that are serious about Budo are also people that are interested in bettering themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yes and no. Because, you can still train, but if you don't actively... just showing up at the dojo and going through the drills won't do much. Mm-hmm. You have to take kind of some ownership or responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually have to apply it. You can't just read about a concept or just show up and do techniques and think that that's... you might improve your physical health, but that may be all.
Yeah.
You're not... It may not improve your relationships with other people. It may not improve, job performance or your discipline. Okay, I go to class, I train hard, and then when I get home, I sit on my ass on the couch and watch TV for the next 3 days until class happens again.
Yeah.
You actually have to practice the concepts. There's the physical side. I think maybe one of the questions was why do people start training Budo? Is what you said a minute ago or
yes.
two. I think a lot of people start out with either the most common reason I suspect are they either want to do something that's physically healthy but fun. Going to the gym and doing the same routines over and over and over can get really boring. All right, that's why people like New Year's resolutions every year. They start at the gym, they get bored, they quit.
Oh yeah, I'm the poster child for getting bored about things. Every 2 weeks, I'm researching a new thing and then I forget about it.
The other reason would be they actually want to learn some self-defense. And then they start to realize the depth. And then you have a few people who can appreciate that depth and they want to go further and further and further. So, that's maybe another part of that question was why is, or we were talking about Budo being hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be, physically it's not the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, right.
But exposing your positive and negative truths to yourself, that's hard.
Yeah.
It's you start to realize your own insufficiencies and maybe you start to address them, right? This was a physical thing, but I think it applied to other things too. One seminar, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years ago maybe, that I hosted Ascension Sensei to teach, and he was, he told me a couple things. And that's part of it too, is you have to read the situation. This is another reason why I have a good heart. If you have a good heart or a pure heart, then you can see what's actually happening in the world versus if you've got some kind of stain in your heart or you've got some kind of lens on it, that you interpret the world according to that lens and not the way it actually is, right? So he was telling me in the particular movement we were practicing that I was being too aggressive. And so I needed to, like, my stance, my physical presence was way too much. And so what that'll create, you know, in a martial context, like physical martial context, is the opponent like girding his loins, like getting
Gird
ready.
your loins like a
like
man.
like the Job story, like he will like brace himself, and so he'll be harder to defeat or harder to survive. But also, like, being that aggressive kind of colors your. It's like seeing red, but you move in red.
Yeah.
And then if you're moving in red, you may make a mistake because you're only seeing through one lens, and then you get blindsided. You're talking about exposing truths and the truths of yourself, the truth of yourself. Like, so I was at a seminar one time, and I made this. I was talking about, okay, you hit the guy here, and it was like, what if you punch him in the nose and you broke his nose and there's blood? Well, if you're the type of person who faints on the sight of blood, if you're going to practice martial arts, you better deal with that. You better get therapy, whatever you need to do, because there's a good chance you're going to see blood. You punch the guy in the nose, which isn't a fight ender. You had your Shodan. You got your nose broken on your Shodan test.
Yeah.
And it didn't stop you from fighting.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. But, like, if you hit a guy and you break his nose and you see the blood and you're the type of person who passes out when they see blood, like, there's no stopping them if you're unconscious.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's an aspect, okay, I better deal with this.
Yeah.
And that's a very, I would say, elementary example. But it's also, I would do this, I would do that, but do you really have, control of that, back to Peterson, or Jung, have you integrated the shadow, right?
The shadow.
Have you, do you have control of the inner monster in you that you can cause physical damage and pain to another human being in order to save your own life or protect someone else?
Yeah.
And not everyone has that in them. Like, some people will let themselves get beat up.
Yeah.
Like rationally, in their rational mind, they think, well, I would do this or I would do that. I would fight back. But in reality, they won't. I mean, you and I have seen it plenty of times where we put protective gear on. Like, no one's going to get seriously injured. And the person won't hit us back. Like, you have to yell at them, hit me, hit me, hit me. And they finally hit me, and it actually causes a result that works.
Yeah.
It's like, you have to get comfortable causing pain to other people.
Yeah.
And, like, that's an everyday class occurrence. It's like, you have to be comfortable enough with causing pain and suffering to another person just to participate in even an easy class.
Yeah.
It's not like we're going hard and, like, trying to break each other's bones. No one's getting damaged. I mean, you might have some bruises or scrapes, but you also have to get comfortable with being in pain, like, to take on suffering. And not everybody's up for it.
Yeah.
Which, and, if you're really paying attention, that tells you something about yourself. It's like, and I think human beings, to be healthy and live a healthy, good life, they have to be able to take on suffering, and they have to be able to stand up for themselves and speak the truth, and that's part of justice. You speak the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be able to both, particularly in martial arts, you've got to be able to willing to cause some pain and suffering. You have to be willing to take on some pain and suffering.
I think it's humbling that it's so hard too.
Yeah, and you also realize you're not the Billy Badass you think you are.
Yes.
There's always someone better.
Yeah, for sure. And this is like, everything I'm about to say is going to sound very arrogant. I just want to brace everybody. If I put my mind to do something, I can pick stuff up quick.
Right.
Thank God. I mean, I've been blessed with. God, that sounds so arrogant.
I would say that's called talent. Like, that's God-given.
I've got some talent. I don't want to be a butthead about it, but, like, if I try to learn how to play a new musical instrument, I'm going to learn how to play that musical instrument.
Except maybe the violin.
Except the violin. Except that freaking violin. But I'm going to learn it, and I'm going to learn it at such a rate that it will make some people angry. Like, and I'm just... So I told you it would sound arrogant.
In the 10 years I've known you, I've seen you do this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, every now and then I'll be in a conversation with someone and we'll talk about you, and I'm like, Caleb is what I would call a purebred artist. Like, you're always involved in something artistic, whether it's music, painting, or pastel chalk drawings. Nobody can see this, but, you know.
Crush.
See, maybe that could be like in the connected, like,
I can put it
website
in the,
article or something.
I can, yeah.
So, like, a little bit of painting, music, you know, you play guitar, you've gotten a mandolin, you started keying piano recently, playing some Elton John.
Yep.
Started a podcast. You've written a bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. So it's not you can, and they're all pretty good quality for everything that you do. It's not like you started it and it just, you're god awful at all those for the entire time you try it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'll take all that. But no, in sincerity, I'm blessed in that way. But the thing about Budo is it always presents a challenge that will make me look like a fool. And maybe that's one reason I do it too. I don't know. I don't know.
You kind of have to enjoy doing hard things, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because there's things about like that freaking kata we were looking at the other day for Kenjutsu.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's so simple, but it's not.
Right.
Those parts of it, Budo always kind of presents to me something that's a little bit harder.
Yeah,
Of all the arts that I've dabbled in, it's the one that it's kind of like the most treacherous path, in a sense, or it's the most challenging path.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect all art could be that way.
Sure.
If
whatever
it depends on what your passion is going to be, like how deep you're going to go into that particular thing. Because, like, there's only so much you can do and be very competent at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't consider myself talented when it comes to martial arts or music. Like, every bit I have to work at, I feel like. But I do like that it's something challenging. I can't. Yeah, I couldn't do something that I felt like, oh, I've got this, and there's nothing more. Like I get bored, or you need. Well, it's like taking on that voluntary suffering, and fucking Peterson, man.
And to take on your suffering and bear it. But yeah, that's just Budo. I mean, Budo's just, it does that for me, at least. And it may be the depth too, like you're saying, of like, and I think you're right. Like any art you could dig into to a point that you'll see it in a way that you wouldn't otherwise see it from the surface level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the more you get into it, the more you see, like, the more trained your eyes become, so to speak.
Exactly.
Like you can tell, like, oh, okay, you see, like, someone who's starting to practice an art, whether it's martial arts or music or whatever, and it's like, okay, that person can see it on that level, but I can see it on a deeper level.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Like, there's the metaphor of the sword polisher, right? So if you're building a Japanese sword, like, there's a long process. You've got a guy who actually takes the raw materials and uses the forge and creates the blade, builds it, and you got another guy who does the handle or does the engravings, that sort of thing. You've got a guy who does the polishing. And maybe, I guess a lot of times it may be the same guy, but a guy who's polishing a sword, he takes like these thin stones that'll fit on the tip of your index finger, and then he polishes the blemishes out of the blade. And so, like, someone like you and I who really don't know what we're looking at, like, I've never apprenticed with a sword maker. I might look at a sword and say, "Wow, that's really nice." Whereas the professional, experienced sword polisher will look at it and he says, "Oh, I see all these blemishes."
Yes.
Right. And so he's got a highly trained eye for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you can hear music that the untrained person was like, "Oh, that's really nice," but someone who's got more of an ear is like, "Oh, that's not very good."
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of the reason, like, it's called Budo. Like, and Do in that sense means like way.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear like things like taijutsu, kenjutsu, but you also have like kendo.
Yeah.
Or kendo may be a bad example because it's basically a sport now.
Mm.
And again, this may be my untrained eye because I don't study kendo.
Mm.
There may be much greater depth to it, but anyway, like jutsu implies like a method or a skill or practice, something like that. Do implies a way of life, like there's a spiritual side to it. And I think Budo, martial arts or martial ways or however you want to, I'm not exactly sure how to translate that. A lot of things don't translate very well, like directly from like Japanese to English. But the implication is a way of life, right? And so you start, it's a way to functionalize. This is just me talking out loud. It may be a way to functionalize how you perceive life in order to make it functional.
Mm-hmm.
In order to find a way to organize the world in such a way that you can live and live well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the only path. Some people do it through yoga. Some people do it through their work. Some people build things like, cathedrals and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a guiding force so that they live their life well.
Yeah.
Martial arts just happened to click with me. And so I kind of primarily view life through that lens, but not necessarily to the exclusion of all other lenses. Like you shouldn't, like that's a common thing in Budo is like don't get trapped by one idea.
Yeah.
Right. You still need to be open enough that you can maybe at least see hazily through other lenses. At least that.
Yeah.
Or maybe see clear, hopefully clearly through a couple other lenses. But
this is something that, so recently, since we've been doing kenjutsu, this would be a good segue. I'm proud of this. So recently, I've been listening to an audiobook of Gorin no Sho, which is the Book of Five Rings by Musashi. So Musashi is, for people who are into martial arts or in all things Japanese, they will know that name. If you don't know that name, you certainly know the figure. If you've ever seen a movie or a video games is everywhere in video games.
Yeah.
And there's a guy with a short sword and a long sword, and he's usually holding it down like this and looking all bad.
Yeah.
That guy's Musashi. Like he's an archetype in a sense.
He's a cultural icon.
Yeah, he's famous for that style of Nitenru, which is like the two swords Ryu or whatever.
Basically, for people who don't know, basically, when you have swords, and the samurai would carry two swords, they would have a long sword that most people recognize as a katana, and then a wakizashi, which is a short version of that's only maybe like a foot and a half long.
Yep. And he would use both of them, and he's partially a myth in a lot of ways, because there's all these stories about him. Like if you ever watch a documentary about him, you'll hear stories about like when he was 8, he did something, killed a bear with his, I don't know. Like that's just, there's a lot of myth surrounding him.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, exactly. But he wrote this book, and it's about his strategy and his ideas. And I'm quickly forgetting my segue. But he starts out, maybe I'll remember it as I talk. I remember now. He talks in the first book about that. He talks about like there's 5 people, there's the carpenter, the artisan, and the this and the that and the that. Yeah. And he talks about how you should study how the artisan sees the world, and how like the carpenter is able to size up men to know who according to their abilities, who should be building the lintels for the door, and who should be building who should be doing the framing,
right?
Who's the big dummy like me when I'm working at Madison's place, who doesn't know what he's doing so much. That's the guy to do the framing, because it doesn't have to be as pretty. But he talks about that, about like trying to see through other paths, even if you're not on that path. But so the segue is to Musashi himself, because this is something that I wanted to bring up since I've been talking about him. And we were talking about him the other day, and you mentioned, or last night, and you mentioned that, there's a difference in, I guess, best maybe and most popular. And in some ways, maybe Musashi falls in that really popular man, myth, legend way.
Yeah. Well, just as a step back real quick, like talking about studying the ways of the artisan and the merchant and, this, that, and the other, the musician, whatever. I think, like, let's say you're going to college or whatever and you have an elective, like, because I did this. I was going for something not music related, but I took a music appreciation class. Mm. So, I think that's good. Like, other people do other skills, at least develop an appreciation for it so that you have somewhat of an understanding.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's good. It's just developing yourself as a human being. But yeah, back to Musashi, he's the most famous swordsman of Japan.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knows who he is. But, and I've heard this said, and none of us, how could any of us really know? We can't time travel. We can't go back and actually see, right?
Yeah.
But, that's well, it applies now. It applies in a lot of stuff now, like whether it's, politics or music or martial arts, that we see someone who's popular, but they may not be the best at what they do, right? Mm-hmm. And it's easy to confuse those things. Like, because, the world's complex and we've got all our own personal crap going on, so we don't really think about it, I think. To take a moment and see, okay, this person's popular at what they do. If they're popular, they probably have some kind of skill in it, right? But they may not be the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's, I think, a function of how Budo enhances your life. It's like, okay, you're trying to see the difference between, okay, that person's popular versus that person is extremely skilled. Everyone in America knows who Dr. Phil is. You bring on, this pop psychologist onto and it may be good, I don't know. You bring someone onto a talk show and that person's very popular and they give you 5 minutes of advice and it's like, oh, you're cured. That doesn't really happen in real life, right?
Right. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, there's probably much more competent psychologists out there than Dr. Phil.
Mm-hmm.
He's just very popular.
Yeah.
Right?
Makes sense.
That's, and occasionally you get someone who's both popular and skillful.
Yeah.
So hopefully their popularity is a result of their skill and not because of their charisma necessarily.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Charisma goes a long way with popularity, and it's a face, right? It's like a mask. It may not be the truth.
Yeah.
They just talk really well, but they attract people easily, but maybe they're not actually as good as they think they are.
Mm.
That happens a lot in martial arts. People think they're hot shit and they're not very good.
Yeah.
That's a unique problem.
Yeah.
For people. It's like, oh, okay, especially when you look at someone with authority and rank and how many times they've been in Japan, they lived in Japan, they can speak Japanese, or not, this person's a high rank, they go to Japan every year, they must be good. If you step back logically and think about that, those don't add up. Right?
Yeah.
It's one of the logical fallacies. I just don't know which one. But
right. Mm-hmm.
And so, like, well, that's the assumption. Like, you get someone new in class and they're technically a white belt.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they can't kick your ass.
Yeah.
They just are not skilled in this art.
Right.
Right. They don't know the nuances of the art. Doesn't mean they're not tough and they can't brawl.
Right.
And so, like, I think a lot of black belts, as they train, they forget that. It's like, don't let your guard down just because that guy has no formal martial arts experience.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the criminals who are going to kill you on the street don't have formal exactly. Don't have martial arts training, but they know how to do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They're effective at it. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep doing it. Someone would hurt them fighting back, or they'd be in prison.
A lot of times, people in training will talk about how, training with white belts, people who are new, that you should try to do, and in the sense that you can kind of get a feel for how a person might actually move, like a person without a preconception.
Yeah,
might move.
Well, that's a thing in martial arts. Like, you, at higher levels, you get used to moving with people who move like you.
Yes.
And, training with like someone who's like a black belt is nice because they're efficient and they move fluidly.
Yeah.
But then train also with the white belt because they're unpredictable and maybe more likely what you're going to face for real.
Yeah.
And so you had to be skillful enough to deal with both.
Right.
And it's like anybody who's in between white belt and black belt, like it's easy to get indoctrinated into the style, so to speak, or the system.
Right.
And forget that may not be exactly the way you face it.
Yeah.
And you have to maintain an awareness of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, like, when Duncan's not in Japan, if he was here, dadgummit, Duncan. You better get over here. If he was here, it would be very easy for me, and we both have talked about this. It's like, oh, darn, no one else to train with. I guess we're training together. But I think it's because, like, there's a certain vibe that makes sense, and it's easy. I can see myself that it's easy to get trapped by that.
With Duncan, you mean like y'all turn the volume up a little bit?
There's that, and there's some trust there as well.
Yeah.
And especially when we were training together a lot, because for a little while, it was just us sometimes.
Right.
There's like I don't know exactly what it is, but it works. It works well. Things will work the way we both think that they're supposed to work.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like,
this is sometimes nice, but it's also there's a trap there.
Yeah.
You get
sure.
very comfortable with one person's way of moving, and then like
for sure
you train with someone else, and then it's like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. So in martial arts, in Japanese martial arts, Budo, this same word gets used over and over to describe teaching. And to talk about Musashi, he uses it in the Book of Five Rings, which is from the 1600s, I want to say. Somewhere around there.
I think so.
Yeah. And that's the word transmission. If you go to a Japanese Budo, dojo, and you're going to hear a teacher say something about transmission at some point. It's just such a key word that's tied up in it. And the idea is that people will say they don't really, I got hiccups. They'll say they don't teach necessarily, but they transmit.
Right.
What does that mean to you?
So there's this idea, at least maybe it's an idea in the Bujinkan specifically, I'm not sure. But there's this idea like, okay, if we go to class, whatever we're practicing, that's my training as the teacher. And you guys are just along for the ride. So, and a lot of times that's going to be, because I'm working on what I'm working on, I'm not teaching, because how can I teach something I don't know? Right? So it's something I'm trying out. And that's always like the case. And it pushes, doing it that way, it pushes me to understand it better. Whatever the technique or the situation or whatever. What you usually hear, at least in the Bujinkan, when you hear it translated as transmission.
Yeah.
So I don't speak Japanese and I don't read Japanese, so who's to say if that's the best translation for the word? But usually the word den in Japanese is what's associated. So sometimes you hear like densho, which are the scrolls, like the stuff about the martial art that's written down and passed down through the generations. Or you'll hear the term called kuden, which is basically person-to-person voice transmissions, like something you have to hear directly from the teacher that's never written down. Like we've got a couple of schools in classical ryuha, which are like family traditions of martial arts passed down, that have that den in it, like shen den fudo yu. In that sense, I think the shin is translated as like the kanji used, the written character, I think, is for kami, which is like God. But not like God in a Christian sense. It's like a spirit, or like Duncan was saying when we were talking back, messaging back and forth the other day, it's like kind of like a connotation of ancient. Yeah. Something old. Like in the West especially, we tend to personify anything divine. Right. We have to put it into a human form. Like we do that with everything, right? We do it with our cars. You give your car a name, you're personifying your car. Right. You talk about your pet having human qualities. Right. Right. So we do a lot of personification. And I don't know that that's exactly the way is thought like the wind itself has a kami, like the god of the wind, but it's not like a god who creates the wind. The wind itself is the kami, right? But I guess to get back to the original question, I think you hear that transmission. It's like, okay, what's being passed directly from teacher to student? So, in terms of saying transmitting, because Hatsumi Sensei would say that a lot, and that's goes back to the way he teaches. He doesn't really teach very many basics, or at least not in the last 20 years, I'd say. It was never really basics. It was just like, this is what I'm doing, and you're along for the ride. Right? If you ever go to one of his classes, like, well, I'm not sure we'll get that chance now, like he's retired. But I was lucky enough to go to some of his classes, and if you're looking for exactly what to do when a guy grabs you a certain way or a guy punches you a certain way, well, then it's almost a waste of time. He's teaching on a high level, and he's teaching to his high level students. He's not teaching to white belts, right? He's not teaching you how to get out of a wrist grab.
Yeah.
He's teaching you more of on a conceptual level.
Yeah.
One of my friends that lives in Japan, Mike Pierce, kind of put it a way that kind of made sense to me. He's like, okay, it's like you're an art student, like for painting, like oil painting, and if you're a low level practitioner, like first art class, you're learning how to, like, let's say if you're trying to learn from a master painter, you might spend the first extended period of time just learning how to mix the different colors to create the color you want.
Right.
And then you're learning how each brush affects the application of the oil painting on the canvas. And you're learning how to stretch canvases correctly.
Yes.
Right? Going to Hatsumi Sensei's class, and he mentioned Picasso, because Hatsumi Sensei is a fan of Picasso. Like, that's something that people probably focus less on with Hatsumi Sensei, is he's actually a very talented painter. He's been interviewed by the Smithsonian for his painting. And not just the kanji paint, like he paints kanji or brushes kanji in the middle of class for people, like to take home. But so like going to Hatsumi Sensei's class is like you get to go watch Picasso paint.
Yeah.
It's like he's not teaching you anything. You just get to see a master do what
painting.
He does. It's like, Bob Ross. Bob Ross had that TV show. It's like he's painting happy little trees, and and any mistake he made would become a part of the painting, and that's Henka.
Yeah.
That is Henka. So I've seen Hatsumi Sensei. The first time I went was in 2009. We were at a class, and the dojo we were at, there's this place in Ayase called the Budokan. It's literally martial arts house. Not to be confused with the concert hall. Those are two different locations. A lot of big bands play at the Budokan music hall. Anyway, so we're at the Budo house, and we're teaching. We're training, and he's teaching, and the floors in there were hardwood, right? And we don't we wear tabi, which are these like sock-like footwear.
Yeah.
So we got this cloth that's like usually made of cotton, and cotton plus hardwood means slick, right? And so he was telling everybody, he's like, be careful, it's very slick in here, it's the hardwood, So he's, and like 2 seconds after he says that, he's like on the ground, or he's got a guy, lying on his stomach, his uke, his training partner, and he's showing a technique, and he starts to do something, and he slips, because the last few years he would wear these really fuzzy socks. And I think that was to stimulate circulation in his feet.
Yeah.
Right? Because, he wrote about being pre-diabetic in one of his books. So that was to help deal with possibly, whether, I don't know if you have diabetes full-blown or if he's just pre-diabetic, but he's taking care of himself. Anyway, he's kneeling down, he's on the balls of his feet, squatted over this guy, and he starts to do something, he starts to move a little bit, and his feet slip out from under him. They shoot out behind him, so he's basically in a push-up position.
Right.
So belly down as he slips. So he turns this into Henka. He, landed on the guy's kidney with his chin. So he's using his chin as the strike. And this so this is 2009. He was probably close to 80 at the time. No hands touching the ground. He put his hands down by his side. So he was doing a chin-to-toe plank on this guy at 80 years old. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And so that's what a master does. Like, when he screws up, it becomes Henka.
Yeah.
When he makes a mistake, it's just a variation.
Right.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
I was like, people, there's a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in Bujinkan like to get high rank and they let themselves get out of shape. I'm not in the best shape, but, before class we're working out, we're trying.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see, like, what these older guys do. And it's like, oh, yeah, they may move a little slower, but they're 80. But for 80, they're in fantastic shape. Or Sensei was at the time. He was in fantastic shape. You see, like, even Nagase Sensei is now 60.
Mm.
But I've heard from Asuncion Sensei, like, they'll visit Togakure Mountain, like, once a year. He'll take a group of students. Nagase Sensei will take a group of students, and he'll run up the mountain and smoke them all.
Mm.
Like, even at an older age. And, you got guys that are, 30s, 40s, and they can't keep up with him.
Yeah.
I've heard that. And, I got invited to go a couple years ago before all the travel restrictions, and I couldn't make it. But that would be an experience like, so how did you die? I died having a heart attack trying to chase Nagase Sensei up a fucking mountain. Maybe we got off the original question, but
I don't remember what the original question was. Oh, transmission.
Yeah.
It was about transmission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something with being there face to face that's the only way you can capture it.
You mentioned Kuden, which, as I understand, is like
and the most basic definition is basically verbal instruction.
Okay,
like, this is not written down anywhere. I'm telling you how this works, person to person. Like, like, you can read anything, especially in Japanese martial arts. You read a kata and say, okay, these are the steps, but that doesn't mean you have it.
Doesn't mean you have it.
Like, we were doing the bow kata today to get those last two. And it's like, okay, it says, okay, rotate the stick and to strike the top of the head and then thrust. But the real secret is you get them to see that so they block high, and then you pull the stick back past their guard and strike them. Right. That would be Kuden.
That would be Kuden. So, yeah, that's one element. I think even beyond that element, like the ninja films of the 80s and I guess all the way up to this time, you would think that, like,
oh my god.
But there's this sort of mythological feeling that, like, there's these secret techniques, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's always a secret, right?
Right.
And maybe part of that is true in transmission things. But another part of it, I think, is just that, like, the secret is that there is not a great way to tell you how to do something physical in a written form. Like,
yeah, definitely. Like, so an old teacher of mine, Robert Geyer, he used to say, like, okay, it's like, take someone who has trained martial arts. Maybe they train for 10 years, and then they're not training for 5 years, right? They're not a martial artist. They're a former martial artist. So you're a martial artist when you're practicing your art. It's like, okay, I'm a musician, but I haven't played an instrument in 10 years. Am I really a musician?
Right. You were a musician.
Yeah. It's a way of thinking about it, right? So, yeah.
But yeah, no, something that you talked about today when we were training was I guess another group was having some trouble with Gunseki Nage, and you had asked me about some experience that I had where it kind of worked. But that's something that you couldn't write that down. Like, you can't
even speak about that.
Yeah.
That's why I had you talk about it. Like, that's something you can't write. Like, anything you can say, or, well, not exactly, because written language still doesn't, as hard as we try, it doesn't convey, like, things like tone and pitch and rate, volume.
Sure.
Like, if you got a really talented fiction writer, they may be able to convey something, but there's all this written aspect to convey the emotions that hopefully you identify with, but it's still not the same as the actual feeling of that emotion, right? So, like, even with the Gunseki Nage thing, which is for the listeners, I guess, is a certain type of throw.
Yeah.
It's very difficult in practice. Yeah, you couldn't really write it down how it actually really works. You can try to explain it, and maybe you get a little bit closer, like verbally, but it's something that just has to be experienced.
Yes.
And like that's why you have to repeat it over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Because at one point, maybe you get lucky enough and it works exactly right, and you get that sense of how that feels physically. And then after that point, you've got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, at least you've got it.
You've got a little bit better.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when we throw bow shuriken. Like you can sit there and tell a person everything to do, and it'd be right, and it doesn't work until they get it right, and then it's like it sinks into their body.
Yes.
On like a subconscious level, and now like they hit it every time.
Yeah. Well, and it's so wild whether it's throwing bow shuriken or throwing kyoketsu loops, which are both really hard for people to get when they're first learning it.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me to think about that when someone gets it right like one time and it works really well, you can tell them like, okay, do it with that feeling. And like that's the best guiding principle.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's like there's no words to explain this.
Yeah, the best way to say is, okay, you got it, so do it with that feeling again. And then it kind of works.
The Sun Sensei has talked a lot about with like techniques or training or whatever that, okay, you can know how to do it intellectually, but your body, if you can't do it with your body, you can't do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no point in studying any martial art. If we're talking from an intellectual perspective, you could just read, the Densho or whatever. Get Hatsumi Sensei's books and you're good to go. You'd be a ninja master.
I mean, there'd be, for only $1.99, you too can be a ninja master.
You join the international. Never mind.
Yeah.
Whatever it's called.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely like. Anyway, he would say like, you can understand it intellectually.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can do it. You have to put in the repetition. You have to put in the work and the experience, and then you've got a chance of getting it. It's just there's no other way.
Yeah.
You can't perform skillful martial arts, effective martial arts by just reading books or just watching videos. It just does not work. You have to practice.
You have to put it in your body.
Yeah. Because, I mean, just on a practical level, like, you can't think your way through a fight, really.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
So you can take, like, maybe, like, take a couple boxers, and they've got a fight coming up, which is not a fight. It's a match. It's a duel. You know who your opponent is. You know their habits, so you study their habits. You can intellectually develop a game plan, and that can work, right? But you still have to physically practice boxing.
Right.
Right? And then if you take it from a self-defense perspective, you may not know your opponent. Or maybe you do know your opponent. Like, things like murders and rapes like are done by, like 80% of the time, is done by people they know, right? But that doesn't mean you know how they move.
Right.
Like, you're not training with them to say, okay, hello, Mr. Serial Killer, let's train together for a couple months first so I can identify your movement patterns, and now I have a better chance of defending myself.
Yeah.
Like, it's a new experience every time, and you have to adapt immediately.
Yeah.
And it's not something that happens so fast you can't think your way through.
Right.
You have to use, that's another reason, like, for the emphasis on feeling.
Yeah. That reminded me when you said that, like, training with a serial killer. Who was it? Was it Hatsumi Sensei that said? Maybe he said something similar or somebody else, but it's something you've mentioned before. Like the best phone call you could receive is like.
Oh, that's Gavin DeBecker.
Gavin DeBecker. Right.
I think that's where I got that from.
Hatsumi Sensei said like but just don't be there.
Yeah.
Which is another level probably, but
yeah, there was as far as the Gavin DeBecker thing goes, like I think he writes it in his book, The Gift of Fear, and he gives an example. It's like, okay, imagine you're at home and you get a phone call. And it's some guy on the other line. He says, I'm coming over to your house tomorrow at 1 p.m. and I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
And then the question is like, is that a good phone call or a bad phone call? Well, like, psychologically, I guess
it's
really bad.
Yeah. It's like,
tactically, it's the best thing you could ever hope for.
Right.
It's like, oh, bad guy's going to be here at 1 p.m. tomorrow. I guess I won't be here. He's going to be disappointed.
I have one thing to do at 12:59 tomorrow.
Yes. So I got this thing. What thing do you have? It's just this thing I can't get out of. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like when you don't want to meet up with someone. Oh, I wish I could. I'm washing my hair.
Washing my hair.
But like with Hatsune Sensei, there's this famous story that he was at one of the early U.S. Taikai. It was like a big training event that he came and taught. And someone asked him and said, well, what would you do if like someone was, 500 yards away with a sniper rifle and they were trying to shoot you? And his answer was, I just wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Which sounds, on the surface, sounds like a cop-out. Sounds like a cop-out answer. But I think Geyer told me this story. I think he might have been there when that happened. But he was trying... what was it? I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I want to say when that question happened, Geyer was like mean mugging him, like to see if he could sense it. And he's like, yeah, I just wouldn't be there. And like looked at Geyer and like pointed at him. And then walked away, and Geyer was like, fuck. I could be wrong. I mean, if I heard that story with Geyer, it's probably like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, so there's that whole thing.
That I guess that goes into another like section of thinking about it. Like you hear these stories, about Musashi. Like there's a ton of crazy stories about him. And Bujinkan people have all these like stories and legends about Hatsune Sensei.
Right.
And then some people go to the point, or any martial arts master really like what you would consider a master. Someone who's very masterful. That you hear these stories and it's like, okay, how much of that was true and how much has been, puffed up a little bit. And there is like a huge amount of respect for Hatsune Sensei, and especially one, you respect him because he does have a lot of experience and he, has trained a lot of people. And then there's the other aspect of Japanese culture of being respectful. But then some people, I think, take it a little too far and they start to revere him like he's a demigod.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's probably a mistake. Like you can be respectful and have a lot of respect for someone without, looking at them as like on some high, like supernatural, Avengers movie level.
Right.
Like he's still a human being.
Right.
So here's a funny story. I was in Japan in 2009, and I was meeting some friends at this place in Noda. It's a small town that Hatsune Sensei lives in, the headquarters dojo's in. And I was meeting some couple friends that lived there at a bar called, I think it was, what was it? Ichigai. If any Bujinkan people are listening to this, they may know where I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm walking down the street. Friend of mine that I was visiting Japan with told me how to get there, so I'm walking by myself down the street, and I get to a cross street where Hatsune Sensei's house and office is. And I'm walking down the street, and I look down the street, and I see Hatsune Sensei taking out his trash.
Mm.
Like, just doing the normal, everyday human thing. Well, my garbage can is full. I'm taking the trash out.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, here's a funny story, personal experience that I've told other people about, but now I guess it's going to be on mass media. Well,
the masses that listen to Conversapien will hear this. We reach.
Well, we're probably going to reach a lot.
We reach tens of people.
Yes, dozens and dozens of people. Maybe this will go out to the larger Bujinkan community.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway, so I'm walking down the street and I see Hatsune Sensei taking out his trash, and maybe this is connected, like having a good heart and all this stuff and like whatnot. And I think I was listening to a podcast the other day that Andrew Young had done with Paul Massey. Now, Andrew lived there back in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So he was like, at the time that he lived there were very few foreigners living in Japan.
Mm.
I think there might have been, 8 or 9 guys. Right? And he and Paul were talking about like yeah, you might have like this idea of attacking Hatsune Sensei, but it just like it vanishes. It just dissipates. Like it never, you can't hold on to it. It's like your own thought and you can't even hold on to it, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what's going on there, like, psychologically, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm walking down the street to the Ichiban, or Ichigai, yeah. Going down the street to Ichigai. And I see Hatsune Sensei taking out his trash.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, for a moment, I wonder if I tried to, like, point at him with some bad intent and maybe see if he would sense it.
Yeah.
Right? And as soon as the thought happened, it was gone. Like, I was like, no, don't do that. And it's like, so people had this idea of like, well, I've heard young practitioners have this idea. Like somebody had posted something a couple years ago, like, I think it was when the Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather fight came out.
Sure.
Now, Hatsune Sensei is in his late 80s, right? At the time, because this is a couple years ago. And this person that posts is like, well, Hatsune Sensei could kick both their asses at the same time. And I'm like, that's really unrealistic.
Right.
Like, if Hatsune Sensei at 80, and no disrespect to him,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But we've got to be real.
Sure, yeah.
If Sensei got in there in a ring with two professional fighters in their prime, or maybe not even their prime, like I don't know. They're a lot younger, they're in great health, right? And it's 2 versus 1, which is hard for anybody. I don't care how great a shape you are.
Right.
And he's like, oh, they kick both. I'm like, what fantasy world are you living in?
Right.
The thing with Hatsune Sensei is I suspect he's lived his life, one, that both of those guys be like, I can't handle an old guy. And so that's self-protection. That the thought of hitting an elderly man would make them feel horrible. So maybe that's Mutodori, like no blade capture. The other part is when Hatsune Sensei would travel, he'd have bodyguards. Like his students were his bodyguards. So if anybody tried to attack him because he's older, right? Now, I'm sure he would do something and maybe he could, like sneak a knife and just stab them in the throat and they don't know they're dead before they know they're dead.
Yeah.
But he's also surrounded himself with the right kind of people that if something were to happen, they would protect him. To me, that's strategy. That's smart. So you surround yourself with, like, look at a wedding ceremony. Like, if, they say that the whole, like, wedding party, like the groomsmen and the bridesmaids are there. It's at some point in history, apparently, that was to disguise who the actual bride and groom were. Because there was so much, like, strategic alliance between,
right.
Different
kingdoms.
Right. It's like, well, maybe the marriage for a long period was like political instead of it wasn't like romantic marriage like we think of. Right. Yeah, it's not two individuals who love each other, right? So if there's going to be an alliance between two kingdoms and that threatens another kingdom, maybe they try to send an assassin. So all the brides or all the groomsmen and all the bridesmaids dress the same. What are your chances of hitting the right target?
Yeah, that's smart.
So I think, like, when people say, you got to think realistically. Budo is there's truth to it, right? And so you have to look at things truthfully and realistically. Like, don't dwell into fantasy land. Like, nobody's charging up for 4 episodes.
Right.
Super Saiyan.
On the next episode of Dragon Ball Z.
Yes.
Speaking of Dragon Ball, so there's some things about Dragon. Like, I grew up with Dragon Ball Z, and I'm a big. It's weird to say I'm a big Dragon Ball Z fan now because I'm really. It's not like I sit down and watch it all the time.
Right.
But growing up,
yeah,
like it's a part of my childhood for sure. I've wondered sometimes if it's part of some of my desires to do martial arts and stuff.
Could be,
but. Speaking of Super Saiyans, there's a constant theme in Dragon Ball. This is such a funny conversation to use. But there's a constant theme in that show and in other anime too. I think it's really just an influence from Japanese culture and martial arts. There's a constant theme of like sizing up the opponent and knowing what their power level is in Dragon Ball.
All you have to do is read the card, man.
Like, whether they're over 9,000.
You know what their strengths and weaknesses are if you read the card.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask you about that at some point. And this may be another vague question, like what is violence? But what is that? Like, and I think I mentioned this a second ago. Maybe this was actually before we started recording. But Musashi says in his Gorin no Sho again that like the carpenter can size up his people. I think I did talk about this a second ago.
Yeah, you mentioned it.
And in the same way, you should be able to size up your opponent. And this is also something that you'll hear in every dojo across the world. Probably even non-Japanese, I'm sure, in MMA dojos, I'm sure. Or whatever they call them. Gyms. That's the word.
Right.
This idea of being able to tell or size up an opponent.
Yeah.
What is that? In your opinion?
A lot of context. That's very driven by context, right? So if you've, like you mentioned, like MMA, so it's a combat sport. If they're going to have a fight, like you arrange the fight, you know who you're fighting, so you can take some time, study some videotape, and return some videotapes. I have to return some videotapes.
Oh my God.
It even has a watermark. Hopefully some people got that reference.
Oh, yeah. If they don't, they're lame. You're watching the wrong movies, my friend.
Yes. Anyway, they can study some tape. They can size up their strengths, watch old fights, see what their tendencies are, and develop a game plan.
Right.
You also can just because your training partner is in the dojo or the gym, you naturally over time develop, figure out what their habits are and their strengths and weaknesses, and just through training, right? And then, if it's a sudden attack, like in a self-defense sense, you have split seconds to figure it out, right? And I think, that's, so if you're in a good dojo, it depends, like, so let's say you were doing combat sports, and you're going to fight a particular type of opponent. Maybe they're tall and they have a certain amount of reach. You're divided by weight class in combat sports, and then maybe this person is a certain weight, but their body is extremely tall for that weight, whereas maybe you're more short and stocky, right? So now you have to deal with, okay, a person who's a bit taller has longer reach. How do I adjust to that?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you get sparring partners who fit that physical profile to help you train.
Right.
To get used to it, right? Because you know what you're getting into. Well, like with Budo, especially from a historical perspective, you've got one army lined up on the field next to, facing another army lined up on the field, and you run together and you clash.
Yeah.
So you don't really know who the next opponent is.
Yeah.
It's like you're not fighting one guy that day. You're fighting multiple people that day. Maybe one at a time. Maybe two at a time. Three at a time. You don't know.
Right.
And that's why, like, if you're in a dojo, a good dojo, you train with multiple people and definitely different body types. So you get used to, okay, how do I need to adapt when I'm training to this body type? Oh, I'm going to train the same thing, but now I'm training it against a taller person. How do I adapt it to that? And hopefully, again, back to like understanding it on a body awareness, physical level, you just have a sense, a feeling for it, and you change appropriately. But that takes a lot of practice, right? A lot of hours and a lot of repetition. So I guess this gets into, if you're looking at it from not in a training perspective and not having an agreed upon match, there's a couple ways you look at it, I guess. Like, one is, is it a social violence thing? Like, there's an asshole at the bar who wants to pick a fight.
Right.
Gives you probably a little more time to assess them.
Sure.
To size them up. If it's, a random street attack, maybe you have a little less time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's not that, like, every street attack is a total blitz. Like, violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's always some kind of tell.
Yeah.
Some kind of telegraph, something that indicate that something bad's about to happen. You just have to, train to understand what those signals are.
Right.
So on a purely physical level, like, and this is going to be hard to explain, over podcast media, like, it's something you have to get in the dojo and train,
well, I mean,
right?
what we just talked about a second ago was that, like, there's things that you can't describe.
Like, okay, I guess an easy one is, okay, imagine the opponent is taller than you and their arms are longer than you. Their advantage would be to try to keep you at distance and just punch you a lot, right? So you don't want to be at that distance. So you'd either want to be away from them or enough distance away from them that they can't reach you and hit you, or you've got to get so close to them that their punches lose effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be on that edge where their arm reaches extension.
Right.
So it's like, okay, he's taller than me. I need probably to get inside if I can. If I have to stop him, like if I can't just escape, then I got to get in there and do some damage and stop him. Then you got to figure out how do you get inside his range.
Yep.
And if they're taller, their hips are probably higher off the ground than yours. And if you know some hip throws, there's a good chance you can throw them to the ground and then escape. So let's say your opponent is a little bit shorter than you. Okay, my strategy now would be keep him off of me at range using my punches and kicks. Don't let him on the inside because he might be able to toss me. And it also depends on, okay, are they taller, are they shorter, are they thinner, are they heavier?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a puzzle piece. Like it's like having a jigsaw puzzle in front of you, and you have to figure out which pieces fit with which.
Yes.
There's not some universal piece that you always use. You have to adapt
to the situation,
to that person.
Yeah.
And knowing that's why you study so many. Like, if it was universal, you'd learn like 1, 2, or 3 techniques, and that's all martial arts would be, and everybody would do it. But because people vary so much, you've got to understand on an intuitive level how to fit those pieces together, or how do you fit within that puzzle. The competition itself is a puzzle.
Yeah.
And you got to figure out how do I adapt my shape. And that's like when I say adapt your shape, like that's a metaphor.
This is like the be water, my friend.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like that. Like you have to become what's necessary.
Right.
Which is why back to the whole anger and violence thing. That's why you can't be angry, because anger will put you into a certain shape, so to speak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the only shape you can hold. But when you're empty, which is the whole reason why meditation is so associated with martial arts, like Zen and Shinto and Buddhism and all these things, especially the like Zen meditation, Zazen, is to try to become empty in a way that you can adapt to anything, which I guess from Western mindset sometimes can be scary, because it's like it's maybe sometimes in a negative view it's associated with losing identity, like losing your individuality, but that's actually not true.
Yeah.
Like if anything, you probably become closer to your actual individual self.
It's the can of
Crunch Wrap Supreme.
That's the Crunch Wrap Supreme breaking open. This is the nacho cheese. I see some sour cream and lettuce.
Oh, the inside jokes.
If you don't get it, I mean,
you don't get it.
You don't get it. What can I say for you? Yeah, I have to think about. Do you think there's like a spiritual connotation to the? And that's such a loaded word. That's full of annoying people in purple dresses.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. But if we take it, so let's take the sizing up to an extreme. So you have that guy has long arms, so I don't want to be on his long range punching.
Right.
You have the short guy, like maybe I don't want to grapple with this guy if he's like a jiu-jitsu guy or something. That's all well and good. But then there's like a thing like where maybe it's,
and all that was like basically on a physical level.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then there's like this. So Mike Tyson is vicious, but he I saw an interview with him. I think it was kind of maybe right after he got back out of jail or something. But he was talking about when he fought, he would, and you can see this if you watch like old Mike Tyson videos. It's really interesting. He would like stare down people before he fought, and he says that like the moment that they like he could feel a moment and see like when they looked away or something that he won right then. And if you ask him, he would tell you that that's the moment he won before they ever started throwing punches.
Yeah That's a common thing in martial arts.
Yeah. I don't know if we can talk about it because I don't know if there's words for it.
Yeah. There's. If I forget, remind me to tell the story about the guy in the bar in Columbus, Mississippi.
Okay.
So this is connected to Kuden, right? So Hatsune Sensei put out a video years ago on one of the schools within the Bujinkan, Tokakaryu. And one of the strategies or one of the techniques in it is, okay, when you're surrounded by a bunch of opponents, how to get away. So in the video, he just like throwing stars and blinding powder at pretty much everybody. They all fall down, and then he poses for the camera.
Yeah.
That is not how that's actually done. That was like, I've heard that Hatsune say, "Oh, that's a ninja movie." It's like a commercial.
Yeah.
The real way you do that is you try to sense like their, what would be the right way to say this? Like spiritual disposition, like their confidence level.
Yeah.
I think the Japanese is Jishin Kampo, which is like to read the opponent's spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, let's say you're surrounded by enemies, right? And you may, like, first you're trying to get a sense, okay, who looks nervous and who looks confident? Okay, I see this guy, and oftentimes, as I understand it, the nervous person would stand next to the confident person because they want to be protected.
Yeah.
Like on a subconscious level, maybe. And so if you sense that, okay, you would take the throwing stars and you would toss it at people you suspected, and if you got a reaction, like one person like really flinched, then you might throw a lot of stars at that person. You create a gap in the surrounding opening, and then you run through it and run like hell.
Yeah.
Because 1 versus 2 is bad. If you're 1 versus 8, you're probably going to die.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to escape. There's no like defeating 8 opponents.
Yeah.
Like it's
Only
get the hell
ninja.
out of Dodge.
Only a ninja can defeat 8 ninjas.
Yes. Only a ninja can defeat a ninja. It's this idea of reading the opponent's spirit, right? We play a little bit of that today practicing Kenjutsu, right? Like the attitude with Daijodan, like just, the sword overhead and you're going to cut down is like, no matter what happens, I'm going to cut this person down. That's kind of what Tyson is probably doing in the ring. Is like he's staring him down. If he sees the guy look away, it's like, I've got you.
Yeah.
You turned away.
Yeah.
So I'll get to the Columbus story. There's a story kind of related to this. There was a mass shooting, I think, in Killeen, Texas, and I can't remember when this happened. I think it was like in the 90s. Some guy goes into some restaurant, and
Is it the McDonald's, maybe?
I think it was a McDonald's.
I think I know what you're talking about.
You've heard me tell the story before.
Yeah, I've heard
but
you tell the story.
he starts shooting, like he has a gun, a pistol, I think, and he goes up to random customers and he points it at them. And anyone who turned away, he would shoot. If they would stare back at him, he wouldn't shoot them, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's like he's going to kill people who maybe he in his deranged mind thought were cowards.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Even though like having a gun pointed at you is not a fun experience. I have like, and not in any malicious way, just like I know the danger there. I've had guns, I've been teaching on the range and somebody's not paying attention. They point a gun back at me. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
It's because you can feel it. You're like, ah. It's not comfortable. It's not, not that I was like deathly afraid in that moment. It's like you're being unsafe.
Yep.
But you can feel it.
Yep.
Having a gun pointed at you with malicious intent's got to be way more. I don't want to experience that.
Yeah.
So I was living in Columbus, Mississippi. Moved there for a job, and there's really nothing to do there, or at least there wasn't. Especially if you work third shift.
Right.
Yeah, I'm working third shift. I'm going to bed at like 8 o'clock in the morning, trying to sleep with full sunlight, and then I wake up in the afternoon and have all day to look forward to work.
Yeah,
it was awful.
Yeah.
Anyway, I go to this local bar. Some guys I knew were playing in a band there, and went to see them. Well, there I walked into was full. I was there by myself, and if I had the option, I would have just sat on a bar stool by myself. But every seat is taken. There's a guy sitting by himself in a booth, so the other side is free. So I asked this guy. I never met him before in my life, and I was like, "Hey, mind if I sit here?" And he's like, "Sure." So we're sitting there listening to the music, having a beer, and this drunk dude walks in, and he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, you got $10 I can borrow?" And I'm like, "Sorry man, I don't have any cash." He said, "Well, you got $5 I can borrow?" I was like I said, "Man, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash." And he looks at me and he says, "You need to get out of this chair, or you need to get out of this seat." And I just looked him dead in the face and said, "No." Like, right then I was like, we're sizing each other up right now.
Yeah.
He was trying to figure out what my position was by saying, "Well, you need to get out of that seat." And when I looked at him, I was ready to go.
Yeah.
It's like, no. My attitude, all I actually said was no.
Yeah.
And then my attitude is like, if you want to force this, I'm going to beat the fuck out of you.
Yeah.
Like, my attitude is, you will not enjoy this.
Right.
And so I think on some subconscious level, he recognized that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he was even aware that he recognized it. So he looks at the guy who I've never met before in my life. Mm-hmm. He says, "Do you know this guy?" And the guy that's sitting across from me, the stranger, he's like, "Yeah, he's cool." And so then the drunk guy, that was his face-saving way out.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to be Billy Badass, like trying to convince himself that he's some tough guy.
Right.
Until he met another tough guy that's not going to back down.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Oh, shit." And so he finds a way out by asking, "Do you know him?" It's like, "Yeah, he's cool."
Yep.
Then it was going to be like, "Oh, man, I was just fucking with you." And he like puts his arm around my neck. I was just screwing around, blah, blah, blah. Ha, ha, ha. I was like, uh-huh, yeah.
Right.
I imagine if the guy said, "No, I don't know him," then it'd been like, "Oh, shit, what do I do now?"
Probably, yeah.
Well, I can't lose face. So I guess I'm going to have to press this. And then there might have been a fight. I found out later, like, he said something nasty about some guy's sister and got his ass kicked. Yeah. So he found the fight he was looking for.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the opponent stabbed himself. That's kind of an example of that, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I want to prove that I'm a badass, so I'm going to like try to bully some people, and then I said the wrong thing about somebody's sister and got my ass kicked.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, that was a little example of sizing each other up, which is
There's some
it's sometimes ridiculous. Dick measuring contest.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Well, there's some aspect of that that is, well, you can blah, 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 blah.
Well, I'll hold that question.
I'll hold that. While
you're trying to figure it out. In that example, like, so when I was a kid, I was very scrawny. I got picked on a lot in school.
Yep.
And like at some point in training, I decided I will never let that happen again. So I would tell people, like, it's kind of weird because on a legal perspective, or I guess most on a legal and some it's like a legal versus moral perspective, right?
Right. Mm.
Legally, I'd say avoid fights, right? Because if you get in a fight, there's a good chance you're going to end up in the hospital or in jail.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you beat the guy senseless, I mean, if there's a fight but that wasn't an attack, it was just like two knuckleheads, trying to alpha male each other.
If you're still there when the cops get there, the chances you're going to jail is pretty high.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's just a fight, if the guy just like randomly tries to attack you, you're probably okay. But like, it's like, okay, you're in in that situation in Mississippi, the guy tells me to get out of the seat. Well, tactically speaking, like, that was a bad guy telling me what I need to do to stay safe, which was, if I got out of the seat, no fight would have happened.
Yeah.
But on a moral sense, like, and that's kind of a hard distinction, it's like, I'm not going to be bullied anymore.
Yeah.
So I was putting myself at risk, most likely legally and physically. But I made an assessment. It's like, this guy he's drunk, he's shit-faced. He'll probably like throw a punch and fall down.
Yeah.
Right? Not that I was thinking that at the time. I was just like, if you want the seat, you're going to have to take it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, like, that kind of spirit will deter someone whose intentions are weak or motivations are weak or their spirit is weak. Like, it wasn't necessarily the smartest thing to do, but sometimes, this is my personal opinion, like, it's not like, I probably should be careful about this because I wouldn't professionally say it necessarily. Mm-hmm. But you can't let people get away with that shit.
Mm.
Like, people have to stand up and say, this is enough. No more. You don't get to do anything more.
Yeah.
But, you can be on that side of it, but then also get in trouble legally.
Yeah.
So you got to pick your battles. I mean, at the time, I'm not married. I don't have kids, so I had nothing that I had to stay around to protect.
Yeah.
If that was the case, that I was married and I had kids and that happened, then maybe I would have gave him the booth, because it's just a fucking booth.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and it's like, I'm not going to be bullied. To me, bullying is a low-level form of slavery.
Well, yeah, you were just talking.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about our conversation from earlier where you were talking about, one person's will imposed on another person's will.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Yeah. Well,
I
especially
say get out of the booth, and you get out of the booth.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes that when there's the consent. What's the consent there, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm minding my own business, and you're trying to make me do something that I didn't volunteer for.
Yep.
Like, people like to say that, join the military and then, or you're at your job and you're being told to do stuff you don't want to do. It's like, well, was it within the realm of expectation when you signed on to do this?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you sign on to do certain things, you give up certain freedoms because you want to learn something, right? It's like there's, you take a job and you can't do certain things because that job if you want to keep that job, then you have to behave a certain way.
Right. That's not.
Well, if you didn't want to do that, then don't take the job.
Then don't take the job. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's why I haven't said the F word.
Yeah. I mean, this is an example.
Because I'm a school teacher.
Yeah.
And I never say the F word because, don't kids shouldn't say those words. I would never say any of those words. But no, definitely, I agree with that. But then there's the other case when it's clear cut that someone is where you didn't choose, you didn't consent to it, and now that's when bullying exists, I guess. When someone says you do this or you do that, and
now sometimes it's going to be the case like you're by yourself and there's a 350-pound biker, whatever.
Yeah,
that says you're sitting in my stool. You should probably get out of the stool because it's not worth it. And then it may become a moral thing too, especially if you have a family. It's like, well, your primary job is to be there for your wife and kid, or your spouse and your kids, or whatever. Well, in that case, swallow your pride.
Well, that's sizing up. I mean, that's what what we were just talking about.
It's sizing up opponent, but it's also sizing up the situation itself. Yeah. Like, is this worth it?
Right. And
a lot of times, it's not going to be worth it. So here's a funny example. Like, I don't know if this is an example, but funny side note. I was at a Taikai in Atlanta a few years ago, and I overheard this girl that was training there. She's probably in her early to mid-20s. She's black belt. And overhear her talking about, well, I haven't been in a bar fight in 4 months. And I'm like, the fuck are you doing?
4 whole months.
Yeah. It's like, how many bar fights are you getting into? I think you're completely missing the lesson of martial arts here. Yeah. You need to reevaluate your lifestyle decisions, because this is eventually going to get you killed.
It's been 4 months. Jeez.
Are you this much of an asshole that you're getting into bar fights on a regular basis?
So that was the implication. A long time,
I guess. So how many times you get in a bar fight a year? Oh, 6 times, 7 times a year. Holy crap. Maybe you should quit. You'd probably be better off.
You'd probably be better off in that case, for sure.
So you need to go to anger management classes or something. On that level, I was at a seminar one time, and the teacher, I'll keep nameless for this one. It's like, okay, if you're always good, that's not or how about this? It's like, if you're always being a bad person, or you're behaving badly, or I don't want to say evil, that's the wrong word. And I don't mean badly as in you have bad habits like you're an alcoholic. I mean
darkly? Darkly, maybe.
Mm. If you're always behaving darkly, that's not good. But if you're always behaving good, that's also not good.
Yeah.
It's like, you need to have a little bit of an edge. To protect yourself, you have to have a little bit of an edge. Right? But you only use it when you need to use it. Be careful about considering yourself too morally good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, like Peterson talks about it, you're just a rabbit. You're harmless.
You're a monster.
Yeah. So you have to have this. You have to be integrated with that dark part of yourself. This goes back to like, if you're in training, you're comfortable giving out pain and suffering in class and having no problem with it.
Right.
So yeah, you have to have. I think you have to have that. You have to have a little bit of dark that is under your control.
Yeah. Well, like all of Budo.
Braveheart. I am a savage.
Yeah. What does he say? Oh, so whatever. That's
Yeah.
Portuguese. Whatever. But God, it's such a good movie. I can do a whole podcast. If I ever like don't have a guest one week, I'll just like do a whole podcast talking about Braveheart. I love
That'd be a
that
good
movie,
one.
man. It's my favorite.
I love you. Always have.
I haven't seen that movie in it's probably been like a year. I've said that multiple times this year, but I haven't watched it in a while. Great movie. For anybody who doesn't know the inside joke, I love that movie. As a teacher, talking about bullying. So like schools have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to violence.
Yeah.
I would never encourage violence in school, even though I choose to do martial arts. But it's interesting, and this gets into what you were just talking about, not taking that bullying essentially from that guy. I personally believe, a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine who's just not on board with the no violence policy, zero tolerance policy, who might say something like, well, when you're kids and you're not big enough to hurt each other seriously, and you have great ability to recuperate anyway because you're a kid, it's probably a lesson well learned for both the bully and the kid being bullied if the kid being bullied stands up for himself.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I was probably in kindergarten or so. I mean, I was young.
Yep.
And there was some kid in my class who was a bully. And I don't know what the reasons were. Maybe he had shitty parents. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he'd pick on me. And I told my dad about it. My dad told me, it's like, well, the next time he does that, punch him in the mouth. Well, at that age, dad is all powerful and all knowing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so the next day, like, he tries to bully me, I punch him in the mouth.
Yeah.
It stopped, and we were actually like best friends the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you're an asshole, there's consequences.
Yeah.
And if you don't stop people from bullying you, there's consequences.
Yes.
Yeah, and I got bullied later in school because I was scrawny. I didn't have the physical stature back then. Like, I'm a big guy now.
Yep.
But I was scrawny growing up.
Mm.
And so part of it was like, I love my mom. She did a good job, I think. Like, occasionally she feels bad, like, I didn't, I let you down somehow. I was like, dude, I'm not a criminal. I'm not on drugs. I'm not an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I hold down a job. I pretty much take care of myself. Like,
It's pretty good.
I don't need you around to save me.
Right.
Like, we can now have the type of relationship, me being an adult and her being an adult, that we're actually more friend-like than parent and child, right?
Right.
Anyway, when I was young, she was always wanting me to solve problems with words. And I get where she's coming from. Like, violence as a last resort.
Right.
And she forgot to tell the part, like, okay, but if that doesn't work,
Yeah.
punch that little son of a bitch in the face, and I will deal with the consequences.
Right.
When you're a kid, like, that young, it's like, you do what you need to do to protect yourself. Parents will deal with the consequences. Like,
Right.
Teaching, like, women's self-defense stuff. Like, I've heard cases of women who've been raped, but the girl's mom, like, not have her back, so, well, you shouldn't address that way. And it's like, well, fuck you, mom.
Yeah.
Like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's absolutely terrible.
Right.
So I'll teach, like, women's self-defense things, and I'll tell, I try, especially if they're legally too young to be there training by themselves, I make the moms attend.
Yep.
And then when I'm saying that, I'm, like, talking to the moms,
Yeah.
like, don't you dare be like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If you think that way, you're a terrible person.
Yep.
This is the opportunity to start building that support system should this ever happen, which there's a high probability that could happen because it's like 1 in 5 American women are either
crazy.
raped or attempted rape.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking disgusting.
On the bullying note, I think too, my friend thinks, not me, Not me. Zero tolerance for me. Nonviolent person. But I think that the lesson is also learned by the bully too. Like something about the zero tolerance programs or ideas, I think, deprive the child bully of a lesson that might save that same person's maybe even life. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'd definitely say their life.
Yeah. Well, I have an example, or my friend does. I've talked about this before, but my friend knew a guy who growing up was very skilled at verbal bullying. Don't think was ever in a fight, but everyone knew was like a class A berater. And we grew up in the zero tolerance violence phase because it's been around since probably like I guess the late 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like that wasn't the case when I was in school.
Right. There was no like duke it out back school and everyone will look the other way.
Jeez, I had a bus driver. Two kids had a problem on the bus. He'd like stop the bus, make them come to the front of the bus, and you either shake hands or you fight it out now. But this bullshit that's happening won't happen anymore. Like that was the deal. Yeah. So there's a few fights and there's a few. Okay, we're dropping it right now. We're shaking hands.
Yeah, and so that didn't happen for me growing up. And this guy, like I said, growing up all the way, was just really excelled at that sort of verbal bullying, I would call it, which is probably the most common in school. Is the most common thing nowadays, and the sort of 80s.
Yeah, because if the
80s movie picture of "Give me your lunch money" doesn't really exist because of zero tolerance. That kid, if he exists, he goes to alternative school real quick.
Yeah.
So it shifts, but it's still bullying.
Oh yeah.
But he would do that, and then like we all went to college. I keep confusing me and my friend, but it's just because we have such a close relationship, me and this guy.
Right.
But we all went to college, speaking from his perspective, and that guy apparently was at a bar, apparently said some stuff, and then the people that he said it to waited around outside the bar, and when he was leaving, nearly killed him, and he was in the ICU over it, I think for like at least a week, if not longer. Like serious brain problems at the time.
Yeah.
Didn't have any long-term brain damage, but it was like, that level at the time. It was a serious beating. Everyone that I know that I've talked to, we all know that person, and we were all like, yeah, of course.
Right.
We all know how that situation happened. There's no second guessing. And I always had to wonder, like, man, if someone had just, when we were younger, had been able to, like, not take that from him. Yeah. He would also be spared that experience.
Yeah. There's this idea, I don't know if this is really connected. There's this idea in an old martial art called Shinkaguryu, and they have these concepts of the killing sword and the life-giving sword. And it's like maybe that's connected. I don't know. It's been a while since I've read anything about that, but it's like, well, I mean, it's spare the rod, spoil the child type of thing.
Right.
It's like, yeah, as a little kid, like if he was having this kind of attitude at like 7 or 8 years old, and another 7 or 8 year old like didn't deal with it and just punch him in the mouth.
Yeah.
It probably is like, oh, if I'm an asshole, bad things happen to me.
Right.
It's not complicated. Like people like want to try to like, okay, I'm going to sit little Johnny down. I'm going to talk to him about this. Like, what? It's like, Mom, I know you want the best, but Billy's an asshole and he doesn't care. And he's like, yeah, maybe it's not physical, but back in my day, it's physical.
Yep.
Right. You get a little bit of verbal and then it would escalate to physical.
Yeah.
Like, well, if I can get away with that, I can get away with actually physically bullying.
Right.
Like pushing around, slapping, hair pulling, embarrassing, humiliating people. Maybe you can't get away with that. But then it's like, back to like speech is violence. Like, how you deal with that as a teacher almost, or as a school, making school policies. Like,
right.
Well, we came here to learn, but everybody shut up. Right. I don't like zero tolerance policies.
Yeah.
Because, they're small kids. Like, they need to have rough and tumble.
Yeah.
Like, especially like siblings. I mean, I have a couple cousins, they're the same age. They were twins, a girl and a boy. But when we were kids, like they would have fucking fights.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
balled up fists with each other, and it was pretty much equal.
Yeah.
Because at that age, like they're basically like, they haven't hit puberty. They're basically the same, body type.
Right.
Same amounts of strength.
Right.
They didn't really ever hurt each other. And then like that was over when they like became teenagers. Or there was still a little bit of like, competition and
Right.
stuff, and then when they're adults, like they're tight, they're close.
Yeah.
And there's none of that, right? But going through that because they had siblings and they were fighting with each other all the time, right? I don't think, definitely probably didn't deal with any. I know they got into some fights and when they were teenagers in like high school, middle school, that sort of thing. But they handled themselves well.
Yeah.
Because they were used to fighting. It's like, well, someone's trying to be an asshole, and I'm not going to let them. And I think that is healthy.
Yeah.
Because people think, oh, okay, bullying is like a childhood school issue. No,
Right.
it's not.
No, it's not.
It goes into adulthood. Yeah. I've known a few adult bullies.
For sure.
Or people who are adults who get bullied.
Yep. I think in my own life there have been times where, as an adult, there's been times when somebody has come at me with that disposition. I have exuded my position. I don't know on what level, and not had to deal with their crap afterwards.
Yeah, that's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess, because sometimes you will run into people who try to bully, and then you stand up and they're like, oh crap, and they back off. But then there's some that will take it as a challenge to their ego, and then they'll escalate. So if you're going to stand up, you have to be ready to stand up.
Yeah, true.
Thankfully, I don't have to deal with that much in my adult life.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, now you are an adult and you do have a certain level of strength that can actually do damage. And particularly, if you've got some training and you know how to do damage. Dichotomy of martial arts, like the more skilled you are, the less chances that you're going to have it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm going to avoid this because I'm secure in myself and this isn't worth it. And I know the consequences that, not only may I get hurt if we engage, but also the other person may get hurt if we engage. And then there's the whole legal, going to jail or going to the hospital. And most crap is just not worth it.
Yeah.
Especially social violence. Like it's you get like 30, 40-year-old adolescents.
Yeah.
It's like, so here's a fight, or sort of a fight story, not really a fight story. I'd gone to a bar with a friend of mine. We knew some people there. Like these friends were service industry guys, so they would go in after work and go have a couple beers, go home.
Right.
So we're in there, and I'm talking to them. We're all having a great time, but there's a couple of these regulars that were at the bar, and they were having an issue. And one of them had his girlfriend with him at the time. I'm just sitting there drinking my beer, and I get this feeling off to my left, and I look over to my left, and my friend is there, and he's like pointing at me, and he says, "Come here." I was like, holding my beer, and I was like, damn it. Set my beer down because I knew exactly like what was about to happen.
Where it was going, yeah.
So we get up there, and it's like, okay, we figure out what's going on, and these two regulars, for whatever reason, I don't even remember what the problem was, but one of the guys, like, he had his girlfriend there, so he was like, well, I can't back down because that's an insult to my manhood, and she won't have sex with me later. Or at least that's what his brain was thinking, I guess.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so she's egging all this stuff on. Like, she's more vocal than the guy her boyfriend is, right?
Right.
Because, I mean, it's like one of these things, like, when males have a problem, generally speaking, the final thing is like, okay, we're going to fight, and that's going to settle who's on top.
Right.
It's going to determine the hierarchy, so to speak, right? For women, it's more, okay, I can't physically hurt this guy, really, so I'm going to just rip him apart verbally.
Yeah.
Reputation, destruction, humiliation, that sort of thing. So we're trying to create peace, right?
Yeah.
So we separate them. I sit the one guy who is by himself down, and I say, look, this is what's going to happen. She's going to come over here and try to insult you and insult your manhood and that you're a coward and chicken shit, blah, 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 and try to goad you into a fighting because she's getting off on this.
Yeah.
When she comes over here, whatever she says, don't say a word. don't respond in any way. It's like a psychic vampire. Like she's feeding off the energy of this conflict.
Yeah.
She's getting off on it. I was like, if you shut down, she'll start to starve for that energy, and then she'll move on.
To find someone else, yeah.
Yeah, she'll find something else to create drama from.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. She walked over, tried to insult him for like a couple minutes, and he just like sat there.
Yeah.
And eventually, she left. And it was going to be bad because, like, I think there's a couple other guys with the regular, and this might have been a separate incident, but I don't think so. But it, like, all of our friends in the service industry, like, you guys should stop. You should tell, like, the girlfriend needs to shut up because she's going to create a bad problem for you.
Right.
Because it's going to be 5 versus 13 in the favor. It's in our favor.
Right.
Like, if this goes physical, we will destroy you.
Yeah.
Like, you have no chance.
Yeah.
And so we avoided a huge bar fight by just separating them.
Yeah. So
maybe that's also like justice and mutadori, no blade capture. There's been plenty of close calls with fights that understanding strategy like never got physical.
Yeah. Well, this is like the paradoxical martial artist that's like peaceful.
Oh yeah, I think that was
In a
something
way.
you were as like the pacifist martial artist that we were gonna.
Yeah,
It's something we
I
had talked about, like, a few- a while
long
back.
time ago about like
Yeah.
the pacifist. You'll see like in the movies or anime or whatever it is, like the martial arts character who's like a master, but he's renounced the blade, right? Or
I see what you're saying, but I mean, it's like how Peterson talks about like the edible complex, like a hero story that went wrong.
yeah,
If I'm remembering that correctly.
yeah, and in that case of the person that's like renounced it totally, I think, yeah, what you're saying, like it's the hero story that's gone wrong. Or
I mean, I could see like someone like, okay, if you're going to renounce the blade, so to speak, it's like, but then stop calling yourself a martial artist.
Sure. But what I mean is like the person who has like practiced a martial art, but then doesn't have to use it, is what I'm really talking about.
Oh, okay.
Which goes along with what you just said, which is that like understanding strategy and sort of studying how these things happen, you actually are able to cut through it in a sense.
Yeah, and in that case, then I wouldn't say they're a pacifist.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Because they are waging a battle. It's just they're doing
It's
it
just
without
not
becoming physical.
Yeah. Sure. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't mean
I'm not a big
pacifist-
fan of
Yeah.
that connotation of, or at least the way I understood it, the connotation of pacifist or passivism in that sense.
Right, of like
creating peace.
not gonna do anything. Yeah, no,
taking
that's
shit
not what I
is
mean.
not creating peace.
No, and
Because that's still violence, right?
Yeah.
Or as like a form of violence. Like you can insult me, you can slap me, you can do whatever, and I won't do anything about it.
yeah, no,
And
no.
that just begets more of the same, right? It's like, you slap me across the cheek, and it's like, don't try that again.
right.
If you try, you'll pay for it, right?
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean.
Yeah,
I mean like the person who doesn't seem to ever be, or like a fight will seem to break out, but then it doesn't. That person is able to not even be in it, or to stop it without ever becoming
Right.
physical.
So Bruce Lee, which I don't think was an original Bruce Lee things, like the art of fighting without fighting. I mean, if you're talking about reading Musashi, if you read like some of Bruce Lee's stuff, you read Musashi, and it's like, oh, Musashi said it like hundreds of years ago before Bruce Lee.
Yeah, well, Musashi
is-
says like be water, my
Yeah,
friend. I
yeah.
mean, like over and
But
over.
that's the thing is like it's not.
I was
It's not
thinking
like,
about that the other
and
day.
it's not saying that Bruce Lee stole that stuff. I think that's realizations you come across through the process
Right.
of studying martial arts.
Yeah,
like
there's some.
everyone who really studies well and stays a long time, they'll come to these same realizations,
Yes, uh-huh.
and maybe in their own form or their own words. But
Right.
I think certain things are universals.
Yeah. No, I was listening to Five Rings the other day, and he says in the first scroll when he's explaining the layout of the rest of the book, he talks about like the water scroll I named because it's like about my strategy. And if you notice, like water fits into like, and I was like, oh yeah, Bruce Lee. Like,
Yeah.
it's,
Put water into a teapot, it becomes a teapot.
it's the same. It's all same stuff. It's the same thing. But yeah, and another thing that Musashi says, that I found very interesting, was he says from a strategic standpoint, you have to be able to identify patterns that lead towards like concordance or like the chord, right, coming together, and things that lead toward discordance.
Yeah.
And like talking about like living your life in that way. And that may go back into the whole good heart thing, maybe.
Yeah,
like,
I imagine that being like, or another couple words like order and chaos.
yeah,
Like
exactly. Yeah.
What actions lead to more chaos? What actions lead to more order?
Exactly. Yeah. And he talks about that as like a basic principle of strategy.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. It's like, what is it that's
It's been a
good?
while since I read it. Maybe I should read it again.
The last thing I wanted to talk to you about, this is another sheen, another heart to talk about. But it would be Fudoshin, which is the concept of like an immovable spirit or immovable heart.
Yeah.
And this is something that I have very largely tattooed on my back.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that I know what it means. It's just a concept that got me through my own like a tough spot in my life. So I was like, yeah, let's put that permanently back there. And I don't regret it. It's awesome. But but I thought I would talk to you about it. So Fudoshin means immovable spirit or immovable heart, or whatever Shin means, mind, maybe even.
Yeah, well, that's another one of those, like, it's not cut and dried.
Japanese,
Like,
yeah,
it can be heart and mind and spirit.
Yep. Whatever it is, it's immovable.
Yeah, like, that's a big thing. Like, you hear, like, in martial arts, these things like mind, body, spirit. But in the West, there tends to be, like, this idea that they're three separate things. So, no, there's one entity.
Yeah.
It's the human being is the one entity, and like mind, body, spirit, they're integrated and they influence each other. So yeah, I think that's a common, I don't know if misconception is the right word, or a common way of approaching it rather than seeing it as a unified thing.
Right. Mm. Yeah. So, and that's something that I talked a lot in episode 3 with Ethan about, because he approaches, he's a mobility coach, but that's only one description of I think what he does. Really, it's looking at the full spectrum of movement as a human, kind of as a full unit.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of it. From what I've learned from him is, if you're having some issue, well, let's check the movement first. Are you even moving correctly first?
Yeah,
and maybe if we fix that, then that's it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. You're doing your best to move correctly, but still something's not working right. Okay, now maybe we look at, maybe you've got some tissue problems or lack of range of motion, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so he kind of has that same idea of like our tendency to pull things apart in the West. Especially in medicine, we pull everything apart. And it's great for getting, it's great for getting knowledge, like being able to label things. It's not so great for when you have 20 different doctors with 20 different names, 20 different specializations that aren't communicating with each other. That's
a lot of people in the Bujinkan do that with their training also. Like, it's like, okay, it's all about the balance. And then, like, timing and distance gets neglected.
Yeah.
And then, okay, it's all about the timing. And then balance and distance gets neglected. And then it's all about the distance. And then balance and timing get neglected. And there's a tendency, I think, like, well, one, you have to incorporate all, right? It's fine to like break those down once in a while, but then you have to put it all back together.
Yeah.
And look at it as a interconnected thing.
Yeah.
And then the other mistake, I think, is when people say, okay, I'm going to connect it all. Timing, distance, balance. And then they view them as equally proportionate things. And it's like, that's not quite right either, I don't think. Like, sometimes balance is more important. Sometimes the distance is more important. Sometimes the timing is more important, and sometimes they change fluidly. You have to think of it ultimately as a unified thing, but also unified, but not necessarily equal all the time. Some things are going to be important now, some things are going to be important later.
So Fudoshin, but immovable, mind, spirit, kind of all the same integrated thing.
Yeah.
We were talking about this last night, and you said I said something about Fudoshin. Maybe one of us brought it up as possible subjects for the podcast.
Yeah.
And you said, it may be interesting to talk about like what is Fudoshin versus like so the immovable spirit, whatever you want to call it, versus unable to move. So I wanted to dig into that a bit. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like, So when I was younger, a lot of people would refer to me as, or they would say that I had a very stoic presence or a very stoic personality or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe to some degree that was like in the spirit of, like, in the sense of an immovable spirit, but it was also not a good thing. It was a negative thing at that time in my life. It was that my spirit was unable to move. So I think in a very basic sense, like the idea of the immovable heart, being fudoshin, is that you're pretty resilient when there's outside forces, but it doesn't mean that you're stubborn or like cold-hearted. Your heart can move, like your spirit can move, like you feel things. Like we were saying, like earlier, it's like, okay, if I say something and you get offended, the American mindset is, well, that's your problem.
Yeah.
And the Japanese mindset, well, I said it wrong.
Yeah.
Immovable spirit is I could say that thing, but you wouldn't be offended. You just take it for what it is and not take it too personally. Like, this is a very basic way of understanding it. Like so many things in Budo, I think there's a lot of nuance and depth to it.
Sure.
But you also don't want to be stubborn, that you can't open up and you can't, like, I guess it goes both ways. Like, if you're really closed off as your personality is very closed off, that's probably not good. But also, if you're always open, that's also not good. Yeah. It's like your heart is, in a way, stuck in openness and movement. It's like you don't have control of yourself to a degree. Yeah, maybe that's it. That you can control your own heart, your own spirit. I guess it's connected. Like, there's this idea in Bujinkan martial arts. I forget a couple parts of it. It's like, like enduring your body, enduring these things. But one of them is called Shiki no Shinobu, I think. And it's like to endure your own consciousness. That's kind of very interesting to me. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't know that I could really detail it so much. There's that, I forget the Latin phrase, but it's like, know thyself, right?
Yes.
And it's like, if you really think about it, you don't really know yourself at all.
Yeah.
Or most of us don't really know ourselves as well as we like to think we do.
Right.
It's like when you get angry, like you become a little bit of a different person. Like that personality kind of takes over. Yeah. And you make stupid decisions. You do things that you shouldn't do. You say things you shouldn't do. Okay, do you really know yourself? Okay, this New Year's, I'm going to go to the gym and work out. Okay, if you said that 15 times before and you still think you're going to do it, you don't know yourself at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So, I don't know. It's easier to talk about when it comes up in training because it's hard to talk about like without something specifically to address it with.
Sure.
But, yeah. Some of these are like hard to describe. It's like going back to experience. You have to experience it, and it's like, okay, now I recognize that as this concept,
right?
Maybe,
right,
or something along those lines. I don't know. I never like. So this is like the example of practicing martial arts. We were talking about notes before, where I know kung fu.
Yeah,
right. Like, so it's the famous Matrix line where Neo gets the download.
Yep,
and he says, "I know kung fu." Maybe in that case, since you had it downloaded, but like people say, "Hey, so you know karate, right?" I was like, "Yes."
that's the easiest answer.
You don't want to get in that conversation.
This is
like,
not,
for like I don't know, almost 30 years. Every time I go to see family at like Thanksgiving and Christmas, you still doing karate? Yes. Because like I'm not going to go into the details of actually, it's Budo Taijutsu. And actually, I don't know Budo Taijutsu. I practice Budo Taijutsu.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a funny thing. Like, Claude, reminded me of it because, he's a paramedic. It's like, well, nobody knows medicine. They practice medicine.
Right, yeah.
Nobody knows law. They practice law.
Yeah. And they're always looking back and being like, wow, that was wrong. Especially in medicine. They're like, oh, wow, the leeches didn't work out. That wasn't working.
Yeah. It's like, oh,
now we know.
Drilling a hole in your head doesn't release the evil spirits.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
My bad.
But you practice, you make mistakes, you learn from it, you get better. And so that's like trying to talk about things like Fudoshin or Shiki no Shinobu. You get a sense of it, but I can't really talk about it because I don't know it well enough. I'm still studying it. right? And and that's always the case. Like even as much as you still study and you still practice, and don't get too comfortable thinking, that all these things. That was a revelation. Like listen to Peterson specifically. It's like, okay, there's a whole lot of world and very little of you. Mm-hmm. And so you have to, like I've been listening to some of this stuff on Matt's Meaning this week.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, of all the things you can perceive in your world, to be functional, you have to make most of it irrelevant.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. You can't focus on anything to actually get anywhere. There's just too much going on,
mm-hmm.
and not enough of you to process all of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the way Budo is. There's so much of it. You can't exhaust it, and you'll never get it all. There's just there's too much of it and too little of you.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that's why Hatsune Sensei has asked his student body, the Bujinkan at large, to communicate with each other, because everyone gets a little piece of it
mm-hmm.
that someone else won't get, and then they can share with each other and make each other better.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a difficult thing to do, because, like, okay, you're a finite being, and you have a finite amount of time on the planet, and so how you spend your time training is like, you have to be choosy, right?
Yeah, you can't.
Don't just train with any Tom, Dick, and Harry,
right?
You need to find the people that have something you feel is valuable, and you got to develop the eyes over time to see it, so that you don't waste time with someone who's not that good.
Yeah,
and that's a painful process in the beginning, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And then over time, you start to get a sense of, okay, that guy, he's nice, but he doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy over here, he's a little rough around the edges, like personality-wise, but he's very skillful.
Mm.
And so you got to, like, decide which one is more important to you. Like, for me, it's like I'd rather deal with the guy who's a little more rough but skillful.
Yeah.
I find that they are a little bit more honest.
Yeah.
Whether either honest in what they know and honest when they know they don't know. I've heard that Hatsune Sensei has said, like, if you are training martial arts and you pick a bad teacher, that's your fault.
It's your fault. Mm-hmm.
It's like, a lot of times, like, there is a loyalty in martial arts, right? And I think that's important, definitely in Japanese martial arts, because I think it's probably some kind of trickle-down effect from samurai days,
right,
where you had to vow, like, a lot of loyalty. But there's also cases where people become blindly loyal. Like, they don't question anything. It's like, my teacher knows all.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're setting yourself up for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's important to consider whatever a teacher shows you, but don't just blindly follow it. I mean, that's why you practice it. It's like, you've got to earn that wisdom for yourself. You can't just, like, use wisdom you haven't earned, right? That's why there's a lot of, like, testing the skills. Often in class we'll be there and I'll try something. It's like, do you buy that?
Yeah. And
it's like, yeah or no. And hopefully if I'm doing my job, usually I'll try it and I'm like, okay, I don't buy it. I don't even buy my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, let me play with this some other way. Because, like, you get this idea in your mind or this image in your mind, okay, that might work. And then you try and it's okay, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, then that's going back to, like, discovering it's a path to learn truth, I guess you could say. Like, truth about yourself, truth about the actual skills. Do they work or do they not work?
Right.
But, yeah.
I guess that's probably a good stopping point. We've been going for a while. This will be a record-breaking Conversapien episode. Sorry to Ethan.
I hold the record now.
Snooze, you lose, Ethan. Cheerio, though. So, thank you for doing this again.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be on the show.
I'm honored to have you on here and to talk about, a lot of vague questions.
Yeah, we
that are hard to talk about.
It's like, I thought this was about martial arts. Now we're talking about philosophy. And
yeah, well, it's all the same stuff. And I mean, really,
everything is everything.
Everything. I say that a lot. Everything is everything, but really, it is. This is episode 9 of Conversapien, so check out episode.
That's kind of interesting. 9's an important number in the Bujinkan.
It works out. See, I originally intended to have you on for 10.
Yeah.
And then it just didn't work. For some reason, my math was wrong. And then now you're on 9. So maybe it all worked out.
The gods have looked favorably upon us.
Yeah, there you go.
The stars have aligned.
But thank you again for coming on. And thanks, everyone, for listening to Conversapien. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.